here, celebrating 25 years of the film music websites we have specifically here. We're highlighting Eric Wood's Cinematic Sound, Christian Clemenson's Filmtracks, John Broxton's Movie Music UK.US, and Movie Waves, James Southall, and Christopher Coleman, TrackSounds.com. These websites began 25 years ago, and as I mentioned on social media there a while ago, what were you doing 25 years ago? Well, we were enjoying, 1996 was an embarrassment of riches. Some terrific film scores. You know, we had John Williams' Sleepers, which I always rate as a terrific one. And for those of us in the UK, John and James, you'll remember this, we had a wonderful treat of having John Williams with the London Symphony in June at the Barbican. Do you remember? What a fantastic
I do.
So yes, when we think back to 1996, it's a a wonderful era. I think we all agree that 1990s we do look back on with a lot of fondness in terms of film music, and of course we also had the likes of music from the movies. We should also play credit, in fairness, and Michael Beek was quite active, Daniel Champion very active in film music criticism back then, Dan Goldwasser. There's plenty of people obviously who aren't here, so big shout out to you guys. We know that there were others out there, but we have to, obviously we can't have everyone. It would be a little bit congested, much like my hair at the minute. But anyway, so look, what we're going to do. What we're going to do. My name is Tim Burnham, by the way. I should introduce myself. And 25 years ago, I was working in a video rental store, not quite having the same career as Quentin Tarantino had, but I was certainly. It was fantastic because you had access to film music quite easily. I mean, you popped a video in just to literally hear the music, whenever there was no customers around. And a couple of years later, I then worked as a cinema manager. And again, what a treat for a film music fan, because you had the access to film music. And then during the break, I certainly would have been perusing over your various websites, finding out, back in those days, the American releases were well ahead of the UK releases. So you guys, I was checking your websites to see what was out, and you had a first listen to something which was very exciting, because it was great to have Films Gone Monthly and music from the movies, Soundtrack magazine. Some of these in print magazines were terrific, but obviously naturally there was a kind of a delay whenever the releases were reviewed. So what I thought we'd do, we'd go around alphabetically just to give everyone a fair shot. And naturally, Eric Wood's Cinematic Sound would be the first in the alphabetical ISMA. So Eric, tell us a little bit really about what inspired you to start the website, and maybe a favorite memory you look back on, and then we'll go around the rest of the team.
Sure. I was in my second year of college, and I knew I wanted to do some radio. And maybe a couple months previous, I'd finally listened to Thaxton's Soundtrack Cinema. Now, he was broadcasting in Seattle, and so I heard a web feed of it on my friend's computer. I was over there on a Friday night, and we happened to listen. And I'm like, yeah, that's something I can do. At least I think I could. And so I had about 75 to 100 soundtracks at the time, and I thought I should be able to make a good 2-hour program out of this, as long as I buy a new one every week and I'll play something new. So I went to the station manager. I wrote a 7-page treatment as to what I was going to do, and he said, well, this is all great and all, but we already have a show tunes program, so we can't have 2 shows like that on the air. I'm like, show tunes? What do you mean? He's like, well, like Singing in the Rain and all that sort of stuff. I'm like, no. I play the instrumental music from movies like Star Wars. And he's like, oh, well, that's something interesting. So, okay, yeah, in a couple of weeks, we'll give you a slot on Friday, 10 till 12, and you can play your show and your music. I'm like, this is great. So, September 20th, 1996, I played the main title to Star Wars, but I also felt like the show was, I had to do my DJ voice. And I did.
We all have one.
So,
Okay.
so it's like, hello, everybody, and welcome to the show. And now it's time for Star Wars by John Williams. So that lasted my own voice. Um, but yeah, and so from there, I was on FM for 10 years, then transitioned to online, did on-demand streams, and then finally became a podcast in 2016. But the highlight of my time on FM was in May of 1999 when the Star Wars Episode 1 Phantom Menace soundtrack came out, and for some reason, Sony Classical gave me the world broadcast premiere of that, and that essentially blew up the internet at Mohawk College, is where the show was. For 3 days, the server went down 10 minutes after my show began. About 3,000 to 4,000 people tried to log on to the real audio stream, which could handle about 100 concurrent listeners. And so the only people that were able to hear it were whoever listened to the first 10 minutes, and then the server crashed, and whoever was in the range of the FM signal in Hamilton. So, but that was that's one of my favorite stories, and it's my former station manager's all-time favorite story in the 21 years that he had been in radio, which is pretty incredible. So yeah, that's cinematic sound radio in a nutshell.
Yes, and indeed, from Little Acorns, great hopes grow, because it's certainly grown 25 years later. Christian Clemenson, Filmtracks would be next if we go on the alphabetical journey. And Christian, your website has, I suppose, let's be honest, it's been shrouded with a bit of controversy. The forerunners when it comes to the amount of clicks, over the years.
Yes, and hello everybody, and I apologize for the lawnmower that the neighbor just started up this yard.
Beautifully timed.
And my father decided to take a picture of me just now. So, no, the Filmtracks is I have so many stories I could share about Filmtracks that are extraordinary and that you guys don't know about. But we don't often talk about how we got started, just as Eric was discussing. And for me, I was already joining the web world because it was my day job when I went to college, and so I was selling web accounts, email accounts, true dark ages type of internet solutions. And I decided to create a first website, and the first website was an odd collection of tributes to my friends, to girlfriends, to but also more importantly, movie posters, George Carlin, all sorts of odds and ends. And I discovered, this was 1995 actually, and by early 1996 I discovered that the soundtrack page was getting an extraordinary number of hits. Nobody wanted to read reposted George Carlin quotes, although I found those fairly interesting. And nobody really wanted to read about the movie posters either, which was interesting. But fortunately, I had grown up with soundtracks. My father was a lifelong soundtrack collector. I remember he would blast away somewhere in time and out of Africa and all the romantic John Barry stuff when I was a kid. And he had a huge sound system in the neighboring room to where I grew up. And so he unleashed upon me this collection of LPs and early CDs that he had that I could use then to just write about. And given that it was 1995, that first soundtrack page of mine was largely dedicated to James Horner, as anybody might imagine. So it was of Legends of the Fall, Apollo 13, Braveheart, and so forth. And the traffic became so immense to that one page that I just decided to make it into the site. And so I remember the start of my, I think it was my sophomore year of college, I might be off. I remember sitting in my Econ 101 class, Gen Ed class, trying to figure out what domain name I was going to register for that boy. And those are, and my first selection was actually, I think, movie music. I believe that was still available at the time, but I ended up going with Filmtracks. But time well spent in class. But since then, the site has obviously a well-known personality. It gets a lot of traffic. But I think the best stories that I have are where the site intersects with my real life in unexpected ways. I remember in 1998 or 1999, I went into a B. Dalton booksellers. Don't we all miss bookstores like that? And handed my debit card to the guy, and he recognized the name, and he said, "You're not the guy that runs Filmtracks, are you?" And that has extended through the years to the point where just 2 or 3 years ago, I was working at the city of Seattle, and I was in charge of helping arrange the selection of a vendor to do a couple $1 million worth of work on websites of the city. And I was on a panel on one side of this big, long conference table, and the vendors would come in on the other side and give their hour-long spiel. And on either side of me were all the bigwigs in the web at the city, the head of all web operations for the major departments of the city. And at the end of one of the presentations, one of the young women from the group, from the vendor that had just presented, came up to the other side of the table and he said, "Christian, I've been so meaning to meet you. It's such an honor. I'm Filmtracks, and I love the retro design, and I love all the quirkiness." And I had a moment of panic, because I was convinced that standing there with all these bigwigs next to me, this woman was going to bring up Solaris Lem, or one of the the truly awful things that go on the site if she really loves the quirkiness. And so those little moments end up catching up with me in real life, and those are the stories that I think are the most special. Again, I apologize
Yes.
for the long.
No, and I think, and I'm sure the guy, one of the unique things about the site was it was a clear definition. You'll like this score if you like this. You won't like it if you don't like this. And I think perhaps you may have been the front runner of that format. Would I be right, I think, in saying that? Maybe not. When it comes to film music.
Yeah, when it came, I think one of the things that we forget is that in 1996, we didn't know how to cover film music. We didn't even know how to arrange our websites. Did each soundtrack get a web page? Did each release of a soundtrack get its own page? I was indecisive of that, and we've sort of gone in different directions in that in our publications. Those of us that some of us do an album per page, some of us do a score or a film per page. That's what's kind of unique when you think about it. 96, 97, we could make it all up as we went, and the fans didn't care. There was the readers didn't have any conceptions of how it was supposed to be, and so it was the Wild West. And today everything seems so structural. Everything's database driven. We're all in WordPress blogs that have limitations a certain this way, or other databases that are formatted this way, or shows have to be formatted this way. This is an established way of doing it. Back in the 90s, it was more of a stream of consciousness, and let's just throw something at the wall and see what sticks.
Yeah.
I do miss that.
Well, I think, that era, as you say, 96, 97, you highlighted James Horner there. One of the things I remember in the print magazines, it was a constant ongoing issue where the Horner bashing became really quite intense, and it was becoming quite unnecessary and embarrassing. And, I remember one review highlighting Ransom, going out with a bang instead of a whimper, just silly little, phrases, which it was a shame, because obviously, Braveheart and Legends of the Fall, it wouldn't sound right if they finished with a bang. But, this was a thing. And I think whenever we think back to those print reviews in some of the magazines, I guess obviously, yes, you would sometimes see a letter from certain people responding to those reviews. And I remember Film Score Monthly had quite a few characters who would be quite vocal about their opinions. But when it comes to the message board format, I think maybe perhaps, have all of your websites tried message board and chat rooms, or is it just Christian's? Yes, yep. They have? Okay.
I have.
I tried it, had about 3 messages in 2 years.
Yeah, I had quite a good one for a few years, but it sort of tapered away very quickly.
Yeah, I ran one for maybe a year or so. I can't even remember now. Not long.
Right. Yeah, I'd say it'd be hard work. Especially to moderate. So, Christian, then, thank you very much. We'll come back shortly. And so we're going now to John Broxton, moviemusicuk.us. And John's story is quite interesting because, you're in the UK, but then you emigrated
That's
in
right.
the US, and you also have an interesting history with film music, because I mean you used to work with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra with their film music content, which is must have been a wonderful treat.
Yeah, it was. That was just very briefly towards the end of the 1990s, and I suppose that was because the people who ran the RPO had discovered me. I had met a one of their violinists when I was at a session for something completely unrelated, and he knew of my website, so he approached me at one of this session and asked me if I wanted to help him start a film music contracting business with where I would be a link between him and the RPO and a lot of the composers in the United States that I knew through doing my writing. So yeah, that was interesting. We got a couple of really good composers to come over and record with the RPO. We had John Debney come over and do a score called Relative Values. We had Randy Newman come over and perform a series of concerts in the UK with the RPO string section. So yeah, that was an interesting time. It was nice to actually be behind the scenes and see the nuts and bolts of how film music actually works in a practical sense as a result of that. So yeah, that was really good. That was a really interesting time.
And the inspiration to start your website, what was it really, like because of your love of soundtracks? Because your background
Absolutely.
is financial, isn't it?
Yes and no. I mean, ironically, it's actually quite appropriate that I'm speaking after Christian, because Christian was really the inspiration for me starting my site.
Very good.
I had always loved film music. I'd always, grown up with the Star Wars soundtracks and, James Bond and all that kind of stuff. So it was always present in my life. And I always had these kind of like unrealized desires to write professionally, but that never happened for a variety of reasons that I'm not going to go into. But yeah, in around the summer of 1995 and into 1996, that was when I found Filmtracks. And I thought, oh, this is a thing somebody can do. So I joined Christian's message board and I read his reviews voraciously. And then, James's site had started a few months before mine, and then Tom Daish with Soundtrack Express had started at around the same time. So it was really this discovery of discovering Filmtracks and discovering James's site that really inspired me to do the thing that I had always wanted to do, which was write about media. So at the time, I was working for an academic department in the University of Sheffield in my hometown in England. Nothing to do with music at all. It was to do with healthcare services. But one of the perks of being a staff member was that you were able to have some space on the university web server. So I thought, oh, I'll take this opportunity. So I wrote some incredibly terrible reviews and put them on the web server. And it just really snowballed from there, really. I gradually got more and more soundtracks and built up my collection and started writing more. And I thought, well, I better make this a little bit more professional than I was doing. So I started a dedicated part of my personal website, which I rather ridiculously named Brock's Web's Soundtracks, which was the most appalling name in the history of the internet. And so I did that for a couple of years, and it was quite amazing. The fact that I was just sitting in my home in England and just doing my little reviews in my living room, but yet people from all over the world were reading what I was writing and sending me promos, and people like Ford Thaxton was sending me things, and Ray Costa, one of the agents in the United States, was sending me things, which just astounded me that all these people who actually work in the industry were sending stuff to me to want me to review it. So that really inspired me, encouraged me to continue writing. And again, I thought, well, I'd better make this even more professional. So I changed from Brock's Web Soundtracks to Movie Music UK, and yeah, it just went from there. It really allowed me to bring together all the things that I loved, which was film, which was music, and which was writing. And the fact that people found it in any way useful was just a massive bonus.
Yes, that's right. And then the decision to move to America, was that something that was inspired by being closer to maybe some of the industry, or not really?
Yes and no. I mean, originally it was because they got married. So I was in the United States, I think it was 1999, or maybe perhaps 2000. I don't remember exactly which year it was. But I was in Los Angeles, and I met a girl when I was over here, and one thing led to another, and we ended up getting married. But she was from the United States. So after a couple of years of us being married and living in the in the UK, we decided that, for various reasons, we thought we would try moving to the US. So we made that move, and that was very helpful in terms of me being physically closer to where everything was happening. I had access to composers, I could meet them and interview them, and all that kind of thing. But yeah, it was, and then unfortunately that marriage failed, but I stayed. So here I am.
Yes, indeed. And Kerry says hello to James. That's a perfect segue. We just had a live message. But speaking of messages, we are going to, if you're watching and if you're interested to ask any of the team here some questions, then a session just at the very end. But if during the chat, then we'll make a note of it, and then we shall ask. And obviously it's a family show. So thank you, John. And then James Southall, Movie Waves, the Movie Waves review site is something which, yes, safe to say we've all enjoyed. To the other guys, it's an angle, and there's always a striking wit, and your reviews have all been. And tell us, what inspired you to begin this website of reviews.
It was very, like most things about me, it was a very mundane beginning. It was, so I went off to university 25 years ago last month, and my parents dropped me off. I was left in this tiny little room with like a shower, which led to the whole room becoming flooded every time I had a shower. But I walked out the room and met the people sort of living in the same hallway, and one of them was Tom Daish, who has already been mentioned. And somehow, within about 20 seconds of starting to talk to him, he'd mentioned that he liked James Horner and John Barry or something like that. And I had for several years liked film music, but I had literally never met anybody else who did. And by this remarkable coincidence, there were two of us living within a couple of doors of each other when I started university. And the other thing that happened when I arrived at university was I got access to the internet for the first time in my life. And like any other 18-year-old male getting access to the internet for the first time, I searched for John Williams and Jerry Goldsmith or something like that.
Is that what they search for at 18 years old?
That's how we do it in the UK.
Okay, just checking.
And I discovered that not only was there another physical person, there were other people out there who also like film music. And I got to Christian's site, Filmtracks, and saw, oh, hang on, I quite like the sound of that. And I actually, the first website I wrote was about Terry Wogan, who is a name that will mean something to you, Tim and John, but perhaps not everybody else. But then he was a broadcasting legend in these parts. But then I decided to start doing the film music reviews, and I remember, back then, it wasn't that easy to find the album covers and so on. So I could only review things that Christian had already reviewed. So I could copy his 90 pixel square album covers and put them onto my page.
You heard it here first.
But I really enjoyed doing it. And then a few months later, I discovered I could get people to send me copies of stuff to review. So I could get this music for free. And of course, those were different times when it wasn't otherwise possible to get this stuff for free. And ended up getting all these parcel deliveries of CDs pretty much every day to write about. I made me and John became good friends back when he was still living in this country. We did a lot of stuff together, and well, he arranged everything, and I just came along for the ride of turning up to recording sessions and starting to do interviews and stuff. And we found ourselves in a brilliant holiday in California in about 2000, and we went to the BMI Awards together, all got dressed up in our tuxes. Not sure how you wangle the invite for that. And we walked in, and there was Trevor Rabin, and John introduced himself to him, and Trevor said, "Oh, you're that guy who hates my music." And John just left just the perfect little comic pause and looked at me and said, "Well, if you think I hate it, wait till you see what he thinks about it." And I sort of looked at the floor, and then we went off and had a photo when I was standing about 10 yards away from Lala Schifrin, which
That's right.
Sadly I no longer have that photo. But I always thought, I always from the start, I suppose at the very start it was just something to do, but then I started taking it more seriously. But I always thought, you're writing about an album of film music here. I'm not a musician. I don't know music, so all I can do is write what my feelings are, and nobody can take that too seriously. And that's where I thought, well, let's always try and keep a bit of humour in there. And occasionally I forgot that and got myself into trouble. And by and large, that's it. And so I had an extraordinary experience. I went up to my 40th birthday. We went to Australia for a brilliant holiday. And we arrived after a 30-hour nearly flight and checked into the hotel, went to the beach in Sydney, and me and my daughter were walking along the beach, and somebody walked up to me and said, "Are you James?" And I said yes, and then he started talking about Movie Wave, and I'd been reading the website, and I thought, that's the only time that's ever happened to me. That was extraordinary. It happened in Australia.
Very good. And whenever you were talking about you and John, socializing, also professionally, and you were reporting, tell us about there's a fantastic story of you both meeting the late, great Michael Kamen. Tell us about that experience.
Oh, that was fantastic. I mean, he was the nicest guy you could ever meet. And we turned up at his house to interview. It was, I think, the first time either of us had met any film composer.
Yeah, that's right. The first time for both of us.
He sort of walked in and put us so at ease, and was just that he started telling us about all the film music he loved, because he was a big fan himself. I think one of us tripped over something, and it was this plastic flower, and which seemed out of place in this otherwise very well furnished room we were in, and he looked at it and said, "Oh, George Harrison gave me that." Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
He was brilliant, wasn't he?
Yeah. I think the thing that I remember the most about that day is how well he treated us in terms of the respect he gave us as being journalists. I mean, at that point, James and I had never done anything like this before. He was the first composer we'd ever met. We were still very green and very inexperienced in terms of meeting people and talking to people actually in the industry. And he gave us the respect that much more seasoned journalists should have had, and that we should not have had at all, because we were not seasoned journalists at all. But the fact that he did that, and that he answered our very silly questions with great intelligence and intellect and wit and thoughtfulness. I don't know if James feels the same, but the fact that he did that really encouraged me to say, yes, I actually can do this, that that it's something that is valuable, and that the composers do take it seriously, and they do value the things that we say and the things that we write about. That was a really wonderful experience. I think, were you with me, James, when we saw Debbie Wiseman? Was that the same weekend?
It was.
Debbie Wiseman was the same. We interviewed her after a concert that she gave at the Barbican. I think it was the Barbican. And we were at the reception afterwards, and Debbie was, again, we were nobody in the big scheme of things, but she took time out of this big reception that was for her and for her concert, and she talked to us and again gave a lovely interview, and was very thoughtful and intelligent, and answered our questions very well, and it was just a lovely experience to know that what we were doing had some value, and that was very, very encouraging. I think I don't know if you felt the same, James.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
and of course, we did one with Christopher Young once, didn't we? And we met Ray Costa, the publicist, at his hotel. Mm-hmm. And right, let's go in, because we were going to meet Chris Young at was it Bless the Child? I think a recording session.
Bless the Child at CTS. That's right.
And we walked out of the hotel through the car park, kept walking, reached the end of the car park, looked at each other. Where are we going? And Ray said, I thought we were going to your car. I thought we were going to your car. And ended up having to find our way to wherever it was.
Yeah. I have this abiding memory of that session of the director of Bless the Child was a guy called Chuck Russell, or Charles Russell, I think he goes by now. And they were having some terrible post-production problems during that session. And we turned up and we were supposed to be interviewing Chris during the session or during a break in the session. And there was some massive stuff going on. They were changing the edit. They were changing the visual effects of the finale of this movie. And Chuck Russell was getting more and more agitated that people from the press were there when it was just me and James. We're not the press in any way, shape or form. So he had us thrown out of the session because he didn't want the press to know what was going on with this terrible post-production problems in the finale of Bless the Child. So we had to stay, and they rearranged the interview for the following day. And James and I come down, and we had no overnight bag, we had no change of clothes, we had no toiletries, nothing. So we basically had to crash in this terrible hotel in London for a night so that we could go and interview Chris Young the following day at his hotel. And again, this is another example of a composer really going out of his way to help us when he had no reason to, which speaks very well to Chris's character. So we turned up at his hotel the following day, and he's clearly not slept for something like 16 or 17 hours, including the day before and all night. He's been up all night rewriting this 9-minute finale cue for the score to Bless the Child. He's been basically surviving on black coffee and Marlboros for the entire night, and but he took time out of doing this incredible, last-minute rush job of having to rescore this 10-minute sequence of this film to talk to James and I, and he took an hour out, and again he was wonderfully, kind and answered the questions that we had, and it was just again another great experience of a composer going out of his way to treat James and I very, very well, which again speaks very highly of Chris.
Yes, and I think the film music industry as a whole and as a rule is very much like that. There is a kind of familial feeling, and many composers would do that, and certainly when it comes to interview time, yes, and I think a lot of them are just because I think they spend so much time alone, don't they? And I think they like just that bit of attention now and again, I suppose, and it gives them a chance to sometimes get things off their chest. I mean, we've all experienced that. Maybe we can't really probably mention that stuff here, but well, look, James and John, thank you so much. Christopher Coleman and TrackSounds. Now, many will know his regular podcast, which has many guests, including Eric and Kristen. I've been a guest in the past as well. Always very entertaining. Chris, terrific voice and terrific delivery. And tell us about the beginnings of TrackSounds and how it all began for you.
Yeah, well, I think I was the last to come up with a website here on this panel. I really didn't launch my first one until '97. And like others have shared, Christian's site, Filmtracks, was a huge inspiration on that. I had liked film music since I was a kid, but there was really no one else that I knew that well, I had one friend who loved Star Wars music, but that's about all we shared in terms of film music. So like some others, when you venture on the internet for the first time and you start searching around for things and you find these obscure groups and obscure sites talking about obscure things, you start to feel validated and you're like, oh, there are other people who like this music and they like it enough to make a website about it. And I was just getting into web design and websites in general back then. And so I wanted to build one myself. So I wanted to pick a topic that I had some interest in that wasn't just, I don't know, the most common thing in the world. And I think I was just so excited having found Christian site. I think Ryan Cavini had a couple sites at that time, Good as Goldsmith and the Danny
Yes.
Elfman Music for was it Music for a Darkened Theater? That's the name of the release, but I can't remember the name of his site. It was something like that. It was a
It
spin off of
was,
that.
yeah, it was.
And I just remember being like, wow. And the sites, looked good. I'm like, man, I want to do something along this too. But I want it to look cool, but I want it to look different from theirs. So it was very inspirational on both content and then just the visual side. And so that's kind of where I started. And to be honest, the first version of the site that I launched was on GeoCities and free host. There wasn't a whole heck of a lot you could do with it. But that's where my skill level was. And so I just started building it out. I don't even remember how GeoCities worked. I just know it was 100% online. You had no software that you're using. You just built it through their little framework and off you went. And that lasted for a few months. And then I said, well, let me really supercharge this thing, and I'm going to go to Microsoft Front Page. And we're gonna go the cutting edge of technology and do it on Microsoft Front Page. So I learned that. I used several versions of that and built the site up using that. And just kind of, I looked at a lot of things Christian was doing and was like, oh, I like that idea. I'm going to do my own version of that. Or I'm going to do my own version of something else that he did. I took a lot of inspiration from Filmtracks. And then I started to want to do things that no one else was doing that I could see. It's like, I don't want to just replicate what everyone's doing. So how can I do my reviews differently? What can I do that they're not doing? And that's what kept me interested over all the years of, I forgot how my ratings worked, but I had like sub ratings. I had an overall rating of, out of 10 scale, but then, hey, what the track selection or production value or whatever it was. There's 5 or 6 little subcategories, just things that I wasn't seeing being done consistently elsewhere. Started getting into features of, hey, I'm going to review all of the James Horner compilation soundtracks that were released all around the same time. Forget what year that was. Early 2000s, maybe. I can't remember, or maybe 98, something like that. So yeah, and then like others, all of a sudden CDs started showing up in my mailbox, and I'm like, what are these people doing? Why are they sending me this music? And just became it became very, because it wasn't making any money off of it, but it was just very fulfilling, very validating that you started to get all of these CDs from PR agencies, record labels, from the composers directly, especially when there were promos. They're like, oh, no one has this one because this is a promo. Ha ha, I'm going to write a review. And everyone's going to be like, what? So it just became very validating. Then PR, hey, would you like to interview so-and-so? And I'm like, yeah, sure. I've never done an interview before, but sure, I'll give it a shot. I think my first interview was Jeff Rona, if memory serves. Yeah, I think it was Jeff Rona. And then Don Davis was not too long after that. And so then it really just kind of became a thing unto itself. And it was really fun. And it was really great looking at what everyone else was doing and going to their message boards and, posting about, hey, here's my review for, X title. You've read Christian's and now read mine. And everyone was like, come on, dude, I'm not reading your review. It just became a lot of fun. It was a great community. It was a great vehicle for creative expression for myself. And really, really changed the course of what I did over the years, I think. And it has been something that those years I wouldn't trade for anything, because I learned so much, met so many great people. And I mean, just to have, us 6 on this call. I mean, before a week ago, 2 weeks ago, a few weeks ago, I'd never really seen Christian before in a live sense. And so this is a first in a lot of ways, but it's just interesting to see how you can have kind of these virtual relationships purely through text, a text-based relationship, and it not be raunchy. It's been a great experience, and I was glad to have been a part of the early days, which is a unique time. I'd say things changed a lot over those 25 years. It's not what it was. Not everybody could go and create a website about whatever they wanted, because it took a lot of effort back then, a lot of effort. And, even the name TrackSounds, my SEO knowledge was, oh, I can't get soundtrack.com, but I've got track and sounds. What if I just flip them? I should get good SEO from that. Well, no, it doesn't work that way. But that's where the name actually came from.
Well, I think we've all mentioned about the camaraderie aspect. We've met someone who likes film music, and that was, yes, mainly as a result of the internet and of meeting people on the websites. Because as we all know, that we're all similar ages at college. It was kind of my car was known as the no lyrics vehicle, because if anyone was ever in my car, then it'll just be orchestral, instrumental scores, usually the odd song now and again. And it was just, it's few and far between. Sometimes you'd introduce maybe one of your friends to some music, and they go, "Oh wow, I like this." And I remember playing the Q Fahrenheit from Backdraft, Hans Zimmer's score, and we were driving over the kind of rocky mountains of Morn, and it was just like, it was quite dramatic, and it was perfect driving music, in from that era. So I think we can all relate to, yes, sort of meeting like-minded people online, thanks in no small part to a lot of your websites. The message board, so we've gone around everyone. We've learnt a bit about the beginnings of each website. We should also, this is a little bit under the umbrella of the International Film Music Critics Association, so we should certainly highlight Mikhail Carlson, who was a critic and a film music journalist back in that kind of era. He started the IFMCA was it 1999, wasn't it, John, I think?
97 was the first year that we did something.
97.
Yeah, so our first awards were 98. So.
And this is one of the things the IFMCA is so good at, is shining a spotlight on maybe scores which wouldn't maybe get much attention. We're very fortunate to be able to highlight some very obscure films like say Julia's Eyes, Fernando Velázquez. I thought was a lovely score, but I don't think anyone would have heard it unless we, because the film bombed. Like no one went to see it, but it was such a lovely score, especially the final 5-minute cue. And if it wasn't for us and kind of highlighting it as I think it was nominated that year for best sci-fi horror, I think a lot of people wouldn't have heard it. So one of the things about film music criticism is being able to, obviously it's great getting promos from the big labels, but it's also being able to highlight and showcase something which is a bit maybe left field, obscure.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I mean, we all joked about it, but that actually, I enjoy writing about it, but because it's so uncommon to meet actual people, especially then when you get some feedback from somebody saying, "Oh, I discovered this score or this composer because of what you wrote," that essentially, I think, the value of doing what we do. And I mean, obviously, there's a critical aspect, but sharing this joy that we all get from this music with other people, and allowing people. Obviously, I'm sure we'll talk about this later. Times have changed now because it's so easy to experience whatever music you want to experience, in a few seconds. Whereas back then it was very different. But still, there's almost so much out there now that there's still a valuable role to play in just letting, sharing your love of something with other people.
That was actually a question that just occurred to me. How do you decide what you want to review? I mean, I know from my point of view, it's purely what I have discovered and liked and think is good and want to share with everybody. That whole experience is just part of what drives me to write these days. Does everybody else feel the same? Or do you use different criteria to decide what you write about and how you decide what to publicize?
Let's start with you, Eric.
Yeah, it's a bit different on the radio or podcasting because I'm always thinking of it's sort of in a theme way. So how are all, let's say, 9 albums when I was on FM, how are they all going to relate to each other? So whether it's a composer theme, or it's sci-fi, or it's adventure, or whatnot, or we all know that once we all became rather known within the industry and with the record labels, that the promos were just piling in. So it was constantly doing monthly new releases shows as well. But then, I mean, unlike with you guys who might have to write one a week, I'm playing 9 brand new scores and I have to listen to all 9. And the way that I do my show isn't just, hey, here's the score, I'm going to play it. I really have to pay attention and listen to it. And the whole point of my program is to put it into context. And back then it was a little more difficult to see all the movies and do that. But, I wanted to make sure that I gave you a reason to listen to the score. So yeah, with radio, it was, if it's Halloween, I'm going to play Halloween music. If it's Christmas, I'm going to play Christmas music. If I haven't played anything from, let's say, Elliot Goldenthal back in the 90s, then I would play it. So that's kind of the way I went about picking albums. Nowadays, it's very different with the network, since there's 10 shows all under the Cinematic Sound umbrella, but it's trying to find something always different that I haven't necessarily done before or featured before. I've almost given up on reviewing new stuff because that nearly killed me when I was doing weekly shows again for W Rock Radio for 2 straight years. And some of the stuff wasn't very interesting and I wasn't really enjoying it. So I've kind of gone back and now I want to play stuff that I enjoy or, hey, my listeners are going to enjoy it. And again, I have to create something that is not only informative, but also entertaining. And so, yeah, it's really fun. The best part is putting together the playlist and reconstructing where cues go. Like, I don't necessarily play everything in order. Sometimes I'll play the end credits first and then get to an action track and then love theme or whatever. So that's the fun part, putting together the playlist more so than writing 3,000-4,000 words a show.
You've done some good ones on YouTube, some tribute montages. That's one of the fun things. There's actually, I must highlight this. I don't know if anyone knows the real name of this guy, but there's a guy called Soundtrack Fred on YouTube, and he does some fantastic film music medleys. He knows what cues work, from a certain film. So that's a YouTube subscriber, whoever he is. You should check out Soundtrack Fred. Yes, Chris, same question to you. Is it similar, when it comes to, I suppose, vocal?
Yeah, it was. I think my selection process changed over time. But I think somewhere mid-stride, it became, because we were receiving so many, I know, big, soundtrack problems. You receive so many CDs, you're like, I can't possibly, in a short amount of time cover these. It became, what do I have something to say about? Even if it was a good score, but it's just kind of like, it's a good score. It sounds like this one, sounds like that one. I may not write about it. And if it was a bad score, in my opinion, but I had something to say, like, I think it's bad for these reasons, then I would be motivated to write it. But a middling score was the worst, because just like, what do I say? And so it became really like, okay, what do I have some sort of visceral reaction to, be it positive or negative, or I know some story behind the scenes about it, or something, that there's just something that was going to bring some value to the reader beyond what's the rating of it. Oh, it's an 8, it's a 4, beyond that that there was some reason for them to actually read the review. And as they did, it pulled them along because, oh, okay, this isn't the same stuff that I'm hearing everyone else say or whatever. That's kind of where I found a sweet spot for myself, is like, do I have something to say about it or not? Something of value, which is subjective, I know, but from my from my perspective, do I have something to say?
That's a very good point, and that's the thing. If you haven't got anything to say, don't say it. One of those kind of things I remember being taught from my school teacher. Not that I stayed on interesting things, but anyway, Christian Clemenson from Filmtracks. Yes, one of the yes, as we said earlier, you had a unique angle to categorizing your reviews. The summation, and it was always a great resource actually having. I think in the left toolbar of the site you had details like the technical, crew, the orchestra, which was always very. Did you find it hard getting that information, or was it always, because sometimes you weren't, I suppose it was all on the disc, wasn't it?
It always historically was on the disc. One of the challenges that all of us, John, I'm sure you experience this too, is when you receive digital promos these days, getting crew attribution for these recordings can sometimes be really difficult. Who orchestrated this? Yeah, it's tough, and some of the labels will have back-end press areas where you can go in and find it. You don't really want to rely on Internet Movie Database, obviously, because sometimes all sorts of crap gets put in there. But it is a challenge, and yes, we've all dealt with the fact, of course, that we got inundated with CDs first from Ford Thaxton and then from everybody else, and now we are. I think what gets lost is we're all inundated with digital promos. I mean, my email, we'll get 2 or 3 or 4 of those per day, especially with all of the television series, all the streaming music, streaming platform music that's coming. And it is extraordinarily difficult to keep up with it. Filmtracks is a different animal because I'm envious of John and James's site in a lot of ways, because it reminds me of the 1990s when at Filmtracks for a while I was just reviewing whatever the hell I wanted to review. I mean, I just got something and I said, I want to do all the Res Saraband club CDs for this era or something, and just did it. And one of the downsides of the immense traffic of the site was that I suddenly became very analytics driven. And then when the monetary element came in and the site started bringing in huge amounts of money, that simply fed into more of the analytics side of things. And so my decisions on what to review by 2001 and 2002 were actually written out in a file that I had to send to all the promoters, the reps, the labels and such, saying, here's what I will cover, here's what I will not cover. And they hated that. I mean, it actually got some really terrible reactions from some of these reps. But I said, I'm receiving this amount of music, and I have to get at least X number of views in this coverage in order to meet certain standards to make money for the site and so forth. And what's sad about that is now you fast forward to a year like this year, and I am still analytics driven. I'm not reviewing what I want to write, what I want to review. I am simply reviewing what meets a certain box office threshold, what meets a certain Nielsen ratings threshold for streaming, and those numbers are what guide me. And so I review a lot of 2 and 3 star materials. And I think John and James, there was a few years ago, I actually wrote a program, a little piece of software that scoured our sites. It was, John, when you still had star ratings, and compared the average star ratings for all of our sites. And I came in significantly less enthusiastic about the soundtracks that I reviewed than the 2 you guys did, because I was reviewing crap and stuff that's mediocre crap, a lot of 2 and 3 star stuff. And I don't necessarily want to review this stuff, but when you look at the analytics and you say, okay, last year I only reviewed one score that was discretionary, and that was Masquerade Hotel. I just wanted to do it. I wasn't going to award it anything. It almost made my awards, but I wanted to do it. And it is the worst performing review on the site from the last year or two. I mean, it's just, it's not pulling any, there's nothing I can do to get hits to it. And the point now where you get so sick of reviewing Wrath of Man, Without Remorse, Army of the Dead, all these things over and over again, and it's just like, oh god, yeah. And so when I got to the 25th anniversary day, September 24th for me, a few weeks ago, I decided I was just going to sit down and I was going to finally review James Horner's Living in the Age of Airplanes. I just wanted to do it. It's not going to get any significant traffic. I could have reviewed, some awful thing that's streaming that for some film involving people killing each other 10 different ways, and that would have gotten much more views. But I just wanted to do it, and that's the downside of Filmtracks. Filmtracks exists as an analytic creature, as a gateway to bring people in, and so I sort of have to do that. I have to remember myself. Okay, Wrath of Man. I don't really want to cover Wrath of Man, but no offense, but that's going to bring in potentially somebody who watched the film, noticed the music, and that's their aha moment. For a lot of us, it was Legends of the Fall, or it was something else, but it might be Wrath of Man for somebody. And so that's the purpose of Filmtracks. And it does drive me nuts, but I've just decided I've been doing it so long that way in an analytics-driven model that I'll just stick with it. It works.
I think that's one of the reasons that I'm quite glad that my site has never made any money, because I'm not beholden to that at all. It's interesting. James brought something up a few minutes ago where he was mentioning about how these days it's very easy for anybody to listen to any score that they want to via YouTube or whatever, various Spotify or whatever, and they don't have to put in any thought behind the listening process. Whereas I think when we all started, we all sort of saw ourselves as being for people to find their way into film music, and because people forget these days that when we all first started, film music was very physical product based. Film music was something that you had to physically walk into a shop and buy, whereas everything just comes to you from the internet these days. And money was finite for people, so I think people looked to us as a guide for, okay, what can I spend my $50, my £100 on this month? Which CD should I concentrate on? And so I think we all saw us. Go on, James. Yeah.
I was going to say that it definitely influenced the way I write, because 25 years ago it was necessary to literally describe the music so people knew what it was like, whereas today it's not necessary to do that. And so now the focus can be more on your response or why it works or doesn't work. That whole description process just isn't needed. Nobody's going to decide whether to buy No Time to Die's soundtrack based on whether I say it's got three flutes doing this or whatever. It's much more interesting just to know why you like it, don't like it, or somewhere in between.
Right, and I think that's also why we review what we review now, because nobody needs to come to us anymore to decide whether or not to buy this soundtrack, because they're all going to just listen to it anyway. And I think that's, it ties into what Christian was saying about how, you're very much beholden to box office stats and Nielsen ratings, and because you need the traffic to drive your site, so you review everything that's popular. I sort of made a decision a few years ago in that I got a little bit disillusioned with the whole reviewing thing, because I felt that I wasn't really contributing anything positive to the whole conversation. By the time I'd listened to a score and perhaps seen the film and actually processed my thoughts about what I wanted to write, all my audience had already heard it 20 times, decided what they thought about it, and moved on to the next thing. So what was I really contributing anymore? There was nothing. I wasn't providing that impetus for somebody to actually go and purchase a score anymore. So I decided to sort of shift the focus of my site a little and only concentrate on things that I think people should know about, that they didn't necessarily know about because film. That's why I review a ton of Italian soundtracks and Scandinavian things and things from Japan. Those things get much more of a positive reaction now than if I'm reviewing No Time to Die or Dune or whatever it is that everybody's going to listen to. So I that comes back to what I was saying about, I'm glad I don't have to worry about the money aspect of it, because if 10 people read a review of mine and 10 people are inspired to go and listen to a score necessarily listen to, that's where I get my satisfaction now, rather than having agree with me on what No Time to Die sounds like. I don't know if anybody else feels.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
bring up an interesting point, because we've been at this for a long time, and you're right. There's a point where it's like, who's who's really, reading or listening, and how intently are they doing those things? And so when it comes down to the stuff that I do, James mentioned everything is on YouTube and Spotify and wherever. So I mean, for out of everything that you guys are doing, what I'm doing is almost irrelevant because I'm just playing stuff that's already out there that they can just listen to for free without my commentary. However, and that's the way I used to think. I did talk to a fan of mine, Alan Rogers, who's actually in the chat, and he broke it down to me. And this is the stuff that really inspires me. One is because I'm getting feedback from a listener and a very good friend, but he says, we like the music. It's great. Your show is entertaining, but he says the reason, well, at least he's listening to the program is to hear my point of view, my commentary. That's why he tunes in. And I think that would relate to all of us here where, yeah, we might not have enormous numbers, but you do have that loyal following that really, for over 25 years, have stuck with us and really do give a crap of what John says, James says, Christian says, and Christopher says, because they trust us. And so it doesn't matter what we're reviewing, even if it's the most brand new thing in the entire world. I think, yeah, they're going to listen to it already, but I also think that they're going to gain some extra value behind that purchase or that listen because they are reading something from somebody that they've trusted for 2 decades or more.
I think another side of it is, when I was running Track Sounds consistently, I began to see traffic increase, and so much of it increased from Google searches. And it became a resource for not the film music community as per se, just for people out there searching for stuff. And I got into the kind of down the Christian vein too, in terms of like, okay, what's going to get lots of clicks and turn into affiliate sales. And that did actually pretty well right up until like 2007, 2008, when the economy fell apart. It was doing quite well from all of that stuff. It wasn't my intent, but it just happened, and then you kind of get pulled into it. But like when I had things linked up in Wikipedia, like my Braveheart review or my Gladiator review, those reviews just insane traffic. No matter what else I did, those reviews would just get tons and tons and tons of views. And I began to see, oh, okay, there are lots of people out there who aren't a part of this community that are searching for this stuff, and they want to find resources about these scores. And so that kind of drove me for a while too. It's like, okay, the film music community is going to think, yes, it's great. No, I hate him. He sucks because he doesn't like the score I like. But then there's going to be those who are just out for information. And occasionally I would get an email like, hey, I found your site through here, there. Appreciate your review, bought the soundtrack, or now I'm listening to Hans Zimmer stuff. I didn't know who he was. There was a day that actually existed when people didn't know the name Hans Zimmer. And that was very satisfying, and I'm sure you guys have many similar stories of turning people on to a particular composer, or a score from a composer that's just gotten lost in the shuffle over the years. But hadn't you covered it, they would have maybe never have heard it or never come across it. So, but there is that side too, the reaching the non-film music community, and your review being there as a resource. And I think I'm sure for Christian site that's true, and I'm sure John and James as well. You're getting traffic from all kinds of weird and wonderful places from people that you would never expect, but they're coming across your material and it's beneficial to them.
And I think
Yeah,
that's really
exactly. So,
Go ahead, Christian.
I Christopher, that's a fantastic thing to remind all of us, is that we exist to serve a number of ends, and part of it is just this meeting. I get a lot of feedback from people saying, I just like the fact that I read your site when I was in college, and now I've got kids, they're growing up and they're about to read your site. And as much as that scares me to some degree, how many of our listeners and readers weren't born when we started.
yeah.
There is, it's really
Oh,
frightening.
it's scary. It really is. Yeah.
It's unbelievable. But we have been an integral part. I mean, for those that really value film music and are really in the community, we've been an invaluable nostalgic element. I mean, film music does have a lot of nostalgia element to it, and you throw that we've been consistent in people's lives. Yeah, that's a huge thing. I think the other feedback that I get that's surprising is, the thing about people listening to things on YouTube is important. Wanting to hear our opinion is important. But I think at Filmtracks, the thing that fascinates me is just in the history of albums, because we sometimes see in forums, okay, the micro edits in this album were crap or whatever. And there's some people that are really into that. And for Filmtracks, I try to cover the album history as well, and I'm finding that to be more and more important. When I start getting hate mail directed at me, but saying, can you believe that the club CDs are now being released digitally? Why should I buy the CD? I hate that. I'm a collector. That's if the conversation is shifting there, then that exposes an interesting new purpose for us.
Well, Drew Collier just chatted, left us a message saying, sadly, I wasn't alive in 1996. So your point's proven there, Christian. But there's a lovely message here from Go Kono. He says, I'm Japanese and I discovered Nayaki Sato from Filmtracks, and I'm grateful for Mr. Clemenson for reviewing Masquerade Hotel. So there you go. That's fantastic.
Excellent.
Thank you for messaging.
Cool.
I'm going to tell you a little story here, and it isn't too long, but it'll be relevant to the next kind of question I'm going to ask all of you. The way whenever we often think about something, we can sometimes dream about it because it's in our subconscious, and then we can maybe have a dream about it. So last night, obviously I was thinking about this happening today, last night, and I had a dream. And what happened was we were all chatting here, and then suddenly notification come up saying James Newton Howard has joined the meeting. Admit. So, and I don't remember much else about the dream. Hopefully it continues tonight. But where I'm going with this is when I interviewed James Newton Howard a couple of times over the years, and there was a time I was asking him about his kind of thematic and composing style developing, and he mentioned about the Green Knight, and he said, I got a lot of hate about the Green Knight on the internet, and a lot of people don't understand, I have to follow a directive. So basically, I get a bit of a dig in, and I felt so bad, and it kind of set me off kilter, as whenever we've all interviewed composers, especially ones we look up to, it can sometimes take you off guard whenever they go a direction you think, oh, they're not going to go. And because I remember, I wouldn't do it these days, but naively back then, I think the Green Knight was a while ago. Sorry, the Green Lantern, not the Green Knight.
I was going to say, that was Dan Fart, I think.
Yeah, sorry. The Green Lantern. And it's, it was something that he got a lot of heat for from various corners, because, it was just the way it was. I think everyone expected a big thematic score, big theme. It was very percussive. It was just very, and obviously at the end of the day, he was being told to write that way. And that was a point he was trying to make. He was being told to write this way, percussive loops and everything like that. And I felt so bad because I remember being quite negative about that score. So where I'm going with this is, at the end of the day, we know that composers do look at message boards, and we know that composers do read. And this is also relevant to Yavar and Alan Rogers messaging in. Thank you for messaging. I'll get to a lot of the other messages later as well, but this is relevant to this point. The fact, the interaction with composers, and it's something like, we know Chris Tilton was very active on Film Score Monthly. I remember that, and I remember he would look at the Film Score Monthly message board, and his eyes would get whiplash. From
David Arnold does as well.
Yes, that's right. So let's go around the room. Eric, first of all, yes, give us an occasion where you've come across a composer online in relation to the website.
It's a tough one. I mean, the first ever interaction that really meant something to me and actually impacted my career, and I knew that I was doing something special, was with Michael Giacchino. And this was just when Medal of Honor came out, and I want to thank Christian for introducing me to that, because when I read his review, I'm like, oh my God, someone is writing like this again? I have to get this. And so I tried to figure out who in the world could I contact in order to get the album, because I didn't know how to get it. So Fort Thaxton, I mean, he has been so helpful in getting my show to where it is. And I know, a lot of people have had problems with him, but really, if it wasn't for him and me getting in contact with everybody within the industry, I wouldn't have the show that I have right now. So I have to give him a lot of thanks before that. Anyway, I contacted him and I said, who is this Michael Giacchino guy, and how do I get hold of a copy of Medal of Honor? And so he sent me Giacchino's email address, and I emailed Giacchino, and he said, yeah, absolutely, I'll send one down. And so when I heard it for the first time, yes, Christian's review was absolutely correct, and some. I usually dedicate only like 15 to 20 minutes per album on my show that time, and I'm like, forget it, I'm playing an entire hour. This is just so good. Everybody has to hear this. So I played it, and then I thanked Giacchino again. I said, thank you very much for sending the album. And, I played an hours of it on the program. It was so good. And he wrote back and he says, well, that's incredible. I mean, nobody's played my music on the radio before. And I mean, I hope you have a copy of the recording. I'd love to hear it, which I did. And the next sentence was, so we're recording Medal of Honor Underground this summer. Would you like to come? And I'm like, so, huh? You want some, Southern Ontario Canadian boy to come down and watch the sessions to Medal of Honor? How does that work? How do I get there? what is going on? It was like, oh my God. So yeah, I went there, and I was scared to death. I never met anybody in the industry like that before, and I'm walking into a recording session, and it was at this huge stage. It wasn't at the Bastier Chapel like they recorded the first one. It was at a real recording stage, and I'm just like, who's this Michael guy? I hope he's really nice. Is he gonna? He met me, made me feel welcome, introduced me to Tim Simonek, who's fantastic. The whole crew, the orchestra, they all welcomed me, and I handed him the tape so he could listen to the program, and he listened to it during lunch. And he then came to me and he says, well, the last name's Giacchino, not Giacchino. But anyway, so I brought my camera with me, and I recorded the whole recording session. And I thought, well, I mean, I'm a video editor, and I will put together a music video as a thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. This was such an amazing experience. And so I sent it to him, and he says, well, we love it. EA loves it. DreamWorks loves it. So we need you to come down for Medal of Honor Frontline in Allied Assault. We would like to hire you to record the main theme video, which will be it was in the game this time. And then that happened. They loved it. Secret Weapons of Normandy happened. The video was on the actual soundtrack in the game. Mercenaries happened. And I mean, that was 4 incredible summers, but it was just because I just happened to play something on my show, and he appreciated that. And going a little further, all the other composers that I've talked to are just dumbfounded when they hear that their stuff is played on the radio. And that was back then. It's more common now, but they were like, I cannot believe, like Lee Holdridge. Lee Holdridge was interesting because I asked him for a whole bunch of his promotional stuff, because he had a whole bunch of them in CDs, and he says, well, if you have the part 1 show that you did, would you send it my way? And I did. And then he says, well, this was fantastic. I got a massive box with his entire catalog. And he goes, do what you want with this. And I'm like, are you serious? And so that's when I knew that I was making an impact, but also composers were listening and appreciating what I did. So, I mean, that's a long answer to your question, but I hope that sort of was in the ballpark.
Absolutely, yeah. And Lee Hodges, it's so underrated. A great composer, brilliant composer. Chris Coleman, can you recall a time interaction?
Yeah, I've been trying to think. The one that comes to my mind the first is David Buckley. TrackSounds has been around for quite some time, and when he was writing his score for the Forbidden Kingdom, um, I think I was going to L.A. I can't remember why, but I was just making a bunch of stops and meeting a bunch of people. I went over to Varese Sarabande, met Brian Davis. I think that was the first time I met him face to face. I think there are just various people that I was touching base with, and somehow I got connected with him. He's like, "Oh, well, come to the studio." I was going to interview him. That's what I did. I interviewed him there in that studio, which I think it was Harry Gregson Williams' studio, and he had a suite there. And I mean, I was like feeling like Eric. I was like, "What in the world? What am I doing here?" But he was so personable, uh, and we were able to sit down. And did we? Well, I know we spent a lot of time in his studio as he was writing. He took a lot of pictures, interviewed him, took me up to Eric Gregson Williams' studio up at the very top of this place, and I think it's in Santa Monica, or was in Santa Monica. Amazing, crazy studio that he had, grand piano, all this crazy equipment everywhere. It was fantastic. He wasn't there, unfortunately. Um, and it was just, I think we went, I think we had dinner together, and it was a real special one because, we kind of stayed in contact after I worked on his website and things like that afterwards. And then to see him go on to do The Good Wife and the other guys, I think he did that score. And just to have met someone kind of earlier on in their career, and then you see them kind of grow and become more and more popular and more successful, that's just fun that you're like, hey, I knew him when, you can pull that card on people. But he was such a personable guy, and really appreciated his openness and willingness to say, hey, come to the studio and interview me there, and watch me work a little bit, and let me show you some of the movie. And he even gave me an acknowledgement in the notes, the liner notes of the Forbidden Kingdom score, which, in
Very nice.
1996, 97, you just never think anything like that will ever come to pass. So that's the one that comes to my mind first and really has stuck with me over the years.
Christian.
So I come at this from a different perspective as the other gentleman on this call, in that I have always had a policy that I never want to meet or talk to any composer, and never have. And the reason for that was not just because I was in Montana and Wyoming in the middle of nowhere, and it was, didn't want to go to LA. I mean, no offense to LA, but I was never, when I lived in California, I was not a huge fan of Southern California. But I always thought as a critic was to separate myself as much as possible from the person behind the composition. In other words, if I met this guy, I might really like him. What happens then when I have to say, hey, man, you really dropped the ball here. In my opinion, this sucks. And it's been hard at Filmtracks because the first 3 or 4 months after it opened, I got emails from John Ottman and Adam Holbrook, Lee's son, and Mark McKenzie and Mark Shaman. All the whole group of people just showed up all of a sudden. And through the years, that's continued. One of the things that actually bothers me a little bit is that I almost never responded to them, ever. And you fast forward to the early 2000s, and some composers that are household names now emailed me then saying, hey, I've done a compilation of my early works or whatever equivalent, and I never responded to a single one of them. I think the only one I responded to was Brian Tyler, because he had a technical correction. And if there's a correction, I'll always respond to them and say, hey man, thanks for sending in a correction. That's great. But I find myself not wanting to know about these guys. I don't want to know too much about the personal life. I want to totally separate myself. It makes it easier given that I'm not on social media. So, I'm not interacting with them there. And given all the complications that I have just trying to run Filmtracks and keep it going, and the fan base, of course, and some of the problems that come with that, I actually find it quite liberating not having connections close to the industry. I try to nurture the reps and so forth, of course, because you have to have those relationships to get product and other considerations. But, my lifestyle that disagrees. A lot of people disagree. They wish that I was a little more involved. And just for artistic reasons, I guess I would say I've just decided to separate myself and say, no, I'm not going to go down that path, because where do you stop?
It's true.
Look,
You
it's,
know,
it's a very valid point.
if I lived in LA, you know, if I was where John was, for instance, I've often thought it would be a hell of a lot of fun to go to all these events and to meet these guys as part of the association and such. But there's also something very, and I hate to say this, but it's true, something selfishly convenient about separating yourself from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, Chris,
I agree with that, and I am sorry, Tim. Carry on.
No, the only thing I was just going to say, James, before we come to you, is Chris was saying online just a few days ago that he found a Filmtracks Twitter page started by a fan of your site. I don't know whether did you notice that message from Chris?
No, you know, there's so much out there. I try not to think about it half the times. As I was telling John, actually, there's reproductions of our reviews that are either done manually or by robots all over the internet to steal content for SEO purposes and so forth. And there comes a point where you can pursue that, you know, with abuse departments, and you can go after the legal thing. And for me, also the legal element is important because I've been threatened. Filmtracks has been threatened with lawsuits from a number of different organizations, from royalties agencies to studios, and when that happens after a while, and one I've never told anybody, but cracks me up every time, is when Lionsgate came after me for my Expendables 3 review in 2014, I think it was. And it's so ridiculous that you end up saying, okay, I want to separate myself from all of those folks as much as I can. Just review because I love reviewing, be amongst the fans, but the industry stuff, I don't want to even go there. But yes, you're right. By the fans, well, the fans created a Facebook group, of course. The fans will create Filmtracks all sorts of things, and sometimes it's good-natured, sometimes it isn't, and that just comes with the territory.
Well, I thought the Twitter one was legit until I read the bio. I'm like, oh, this is not legit. So
yeah,
bye.
So did I. I'm the one that tagged Filmtracks on that tweet, and I'm like, I was duped.
Yes. YouTube accounts. There's been impersonators. There's been all sorts of fun through the years. There's been guys contacting my day job employer. So at some point you just take that at what it will and say, okay, I've got the traffic, and if you get the traffic, you're going to get the nonsense.
Yeah.
There was a trend a few years ago of film composer Facebook profiles, which was so fake. I'm sure it was one person just doing it to be completely troublemaking. It was crazy. Like they suddenly, popped up from nowhere. James Southall, yes, tell us what you're about to interject.
I was just going to say, when my face drops and when one of my Facebook friends sends me a link and says, "Oh, I've just written this score for something. Do you want to have a listen?" And I always think, "Oh God, what if I don't like it?" And to be honest, I usually don't like it. However, I remember just thinking back 25 years ago when I can't remember what it was called. There was like a email mailing list equivalent of today's message boards that I joined talking about film music. And I remember one of the active participants was Austin Wintory, who's gone on to become a fabulous composer.
Yeah.
And I just remember, he was like me, sending geeky messages about Jerry Goldsmith and whatever, and then actually went out and has built himself a brilliant career from it. I've had a bit of feedback, like Christian, technical type corrections when as I often do, make mistakes in reviews. But I remember that Mark McKenzie, who Christian also mentioned, contacted me after I wrote a review of what was it called? The Great Miracle, I think.
Greatest Miracle,
going back a few years now, which was fantastic. And I could tell how genuinely touched he was by it. And it's obviously a terrific guy, and he's chosen to be very selective about the types of projects he scores himself, but I'm sure he would have had a brilliant, high-profile career otherwise. And that was really touching to know that actually sometimes you can make a difference. Of course, sometimes it goes the other way, and somebody gets a bit annoyed about what you say. But when I had a few difficulties earlier this year, it was amazing the number of composers who sent messages to me saying, actually, you know, we don't take it personally if you're saying you don't like something. That you're talking about a product and all the factors we've already talked about. But you mentioned with James Newton Howard, you know, they're doing what they need to do on the project. There could be a number of reasons they're writing the music they are, which are not because that's what they really want to do. But they're, you know, it's a team effort, and they're meeting the demands of the team captain. But to hear, especially, there was one composer, I won't say who because it wouldn't be fair, but it's somebody it's fair to say I've not been a great fan of over the years. And for him to write to me and say nice words to me and tell me keep doing what you're doing meant an awful lot. And he's obviously a very nice man indeed, and as I'm sure most of these people are. But like Christian, I did reach a point one time when I thought, you know, yeah, I can't sit and interview a guy and get to know him and so on, and then go and slaughter whatever music is written. I remember Film School Monthly used to do that. In the print copy, you'd see an interview with somebody on one side, and then next to it is a 0-star, this is a load of crap review written by the same person. And I thought that's not really a model they can sustain, and they didn't. But
You know,
I think it does present some challenges. The social media, personal contact with people. I mean, I'm not going to be a personal friend of James Newton Howard every time soon, but you do foster relationships just because the people you meet along the way who do, like Christian say, go off and have successful career, and that it is difficult. Yeah, and I don't write about music by people I personally know because I don't think it's appropriate. But yeah, it's another of those things I would never have thought 25 years ago I'd be getting A-list composers sending me Facebook messages, even if it's just to tell me it wasn't a French horn, it was a trombone, you idiot.
Well, look, what was it? Hollywood executive asked Henry Mancini to put lots of French horns in his score because it was set in France or something like that. Or maybe it was Audrey Previn, I can't remember. One of those legends, but terrific. Just, James, I know you have to go shortly. There's a message to you which I know you'd love to hear. Let me just find it. I think it was from Christian. He was saying how you've inspired him to seek out so many of Ennio Morricone's works due to your tribute. I think you did last year. You did a lot of a retrospective review of some great Morricone scores. So yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And just linking back to something we were talking about earlier, that I love writing about. Thanks, John. I love writing about stuff I love, like Morricone music, but I realised to get people to come to the website and read a review of Morricone, I might have to write about some blockbuster score that I don't really care about. And so that is part of the reason why I still do that, is just to bring in people to read the stuff I want them to read.
Yes. And John, last but certainly not least, just to answer that, I know you've done some great name drops earlier on, but...
Well, yeah, I mean, I actually wanted to do a little bit of a tangent on this, in that it's not specifically related to, well, yeah, I mean, it's not really related to me, but it's more of an IFMCA thing. I mean, obviously, this talk is being done under the auspices of the IFMCA, and we're all very much involved in that. I think one of the most satisfying things for me as somebody who is involved in the IFMCA is when we as a group have a positive effect on somebody's career. Over the years, we've nominated some very obscure scores where, the film goes nowhere internationally, the composer has no international profile, but the music is absolutely sensational. And the fact that we concentrate on that, and the fact that we go out of our way to try and raise the profile of scores like that, I think is something that's very good from that group. And then as a result of what we've done in terms of nominations or wins or highlighting them as part of our awards, we've had positive effects on composers' careers. And I know for a fact that has happened once or twice. And Catherine Dern is somebody who we nominated a couple of years ago. And she's reached out to me a couple of times and said, as a result of the nominations that you've given us and the publicity that we gave her, that's really helped her career in terms of getting more high profile assignments and stuff that she can have on her website. Another composer who in Poland, a guy called Bartosz Hadecki, who in the United States virtually nobody will have heard of, but he's actually quite famous in Poland as a result of this show he did, and this TV show. When we nominated him for that the TV award the year that he was nominated, he got on the evening news in Poland. The fact that we had nominated him made the national television news, and he was interviewed, and one of our Polish IFMCA members was interviewed on the evening news as a result of something that we collectively wanted to celebrate. So I think the fact that happens is a very positive aspect of what we do, and that kind of composer feedback where we've done something for a smaller composer and then that's helped them along the way. I think that's very, very satisfying indeed.
Well, it looks like we temporarily lost Tim.
Did we
I'm sure
lose
he'll
Tim?
be back.
Well,
I'm sure he'll be.
just on that point, John.
Yeah.
We had someone make a comment saying that Christian's approach to reviewing makes sense when you want to be an unbiased critic. On the flip side, John, you meet anybody and everybody because you're out in LA and you go to events. So do you find that you have a problem with being an unbiased critic, or are you able to just say, no matter who you met the day before or you might meet in the future?
No, I don't really have a problem with that. But what I will say is that I have changed the focus of my site to only really look at things that I like. And that's not because of that reason. It's because I don't particularly like writing negative reviews. I feel like I understand that negative reviews are necessary sometimes if you have a larger point to make. But I feel that from my point of view, I want to celebrate the things that are good about film music. I want to tell people what's great, not what's bad. And so you can sort of make the inference in that if I don't review it, I didn't particularly like it. So where that comes into interacting with composers, they'll give me something or, point me in the direction of the score that they've written. If I don't review it, then that's kind of like an underhanded way of saying, nah, I didn't particularly like that very much. So it allows me to maintain those relationships in a positive way, because I think having that relationship can be good sometimes, because especially for young up and coming composers. But I mean, it sounds disingenuous to say that I only review things I like and avoid writing negative reviews, but I do think there's a positive aspect to that. It's just about celebrating something great and not trashing on people, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I talked about this when we saw each other last year, but I find myself in a weird position when I get destroyed by a composer in a personal email, because I've given him a bad review and he just lays waste to me in an email. I do think it does cause me pause. It's not like I'm completely.
Well, yeah, because it's these people's livelihoods that we're commenting on, right?
Correct. And so I try to find it funny, because I try to find everything funny that I get mail at Filmtracks to be funny. But there's it reminds me again, and it's so important for listeners to realize that, yeah, the composers, and not just the composers, the crew in often cases, there's RCP crew members that are regularly reading this stuff.
Yeah.
And if I call one of them a ghostwriter, that's making waves, that term. And so they're reading. they are reading, they are listening, don't unless they're doing it under a hopefully tasteful pseudonym, but yes, and so we have to be cognizant of that.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm sure, I think all of us prefer to write about the stuff we love. I think it's just every now and again something comes along that you think you can tell it's going to have a negative influence on, in your opinion, on
Yeah.
the years to come. And I think, we all fell in love with film music of a certain kind in a certain era, and today's film music is nothing like that. And you can, whether it's good or bad, there are certain tent poles that come along that shift the whole thing, and everybody starts copying, and at the time everyone's going to copy it. And I
Inception.
just can't help myself sometimes saying why I think that's a bad thing. And I've learned to control my temper in these things, and that shouldn't take it too seriously. But it is. I think I'm interested in what everyone else thinks, because film music 2021. You're not going to get Jurassic Park and Apollo 13 and all the stuff that was fairly recent at the time we started doing this. And that was my personal taste. That's what I liked film music to be like, and it isn't like that now. And I've found other things I like, but it's just actually you're not going to get 10 big, bold thematic scores that you're going to be humming the themes from for the rest of your life anymore, like you used to. And it's a frequent criticism of me. You're stuck in the past, you're not, and so I very consciously try to not be stuck in the past, and
but your taste is never going to change.
But that is the thing, isn't it? Your taste.
Yeah, your taste is your taste. Yeah.
And how do you avoid coming across as a dinosaur?
Well, I just think you have to have an acknowledgement of that the fact that your taste is your taste. Yeah.
Hello, yes, I'm back. Sorry,
here's a question. You're talking about us being dinosaurs.
You could show me a dinosaur, did you?
No. I just wanted to ask a question, because James brings something up about us being dinosaurs, and we have been doing this for 25 years. Is there room for someone to start a soundtrack review site now and last 25 years and make an impact now? Is there?
They've tried.
Yeah.
Guys I like a lot, good writers who have tried, and I think the immensity of what we have accomplished. When you start getting 1,500, 2,000, 2,500 reviews under your belt, and then you get a guy who's 21 saying, God, it was terrible just getting 10 of them done. How am I going to do this? And how am I going to compete with these established writers? I'm actually really disappointed that more of the younger writers, some of whom are fantastic, have not caught on and stuck with it. They've come and gone. That worries me.
I think it is possible, but I think you have to go in not with the goal of, I want to last 25 years. You have to go in, I love this, I'm going to write about it, and I'm going to bring my unique voice to it and my whatever special angle on things, and go from there, because that's something I wanted to ask everyone here. I think I know the answer, but when you started in 96, no, I don't think any of us went in with the idea of, we're going to be doing this for 10 or 5, 10, 15, 20 plus years. I would be surprised if any of you would say yes to that, because it was brand new. The medium was brand new. It was just like, hey, let's just check out this wild west of communication, and let's just do it and see what happens. There were no expectations. And it was that passion that drove us. And then as we began to meet other people and communities grew, the validation was there and the fulfillment was there, and it just kept propelling you forward. At least that's how it worked for me. I would imagine it's similar to you. And I would say if anyone's going to do it, continue it, they need to go in with that same mentality of, I just love it and I'm going to pour everything. I would love to know, there's no way to find out. I would love to know the total amount of work man hours we've all cumulatively have put together into this. I mean, it would be absurdly insane the amount of hours that we've put into this. But we did it mostly happily because we loved it. Not every second of that time, but most of it, we did it because we loved it. And I think it's very possible if people go in with that same mentality, it's like, I'm just gonna do it and try to bring something unique and fresh to it in this new, it probably harder now because it doesn't take anything to get your content out on the internet, so that makes it harder, but it's possible. It's just harder now. A lot.
I agree. It's harder now than when we started because it's just, if I was starting now, why would anyone be interested to know what I thought about some album?
Everything's
Well,
changed.
the only reason they might be is because they visited for many years up to this point. I think for somebody starting now, it's a very different world, and and also I know taste is taste, but modern film music is perhaps in a place that it's harder to imagine young people coming out of the cinema thinking, wow, that, and falling in love with this very strange niche genre the way we did, just because of how it's evolved. It's become a much leaner product, hasn't it, in general, for blockbusters anyway, that you're not going to get people running out to even if anyone did this, to the record shop and buying the soundtrack album after the film, because the way films are scored has changed and the style of music has changed. And perhaps I'm just sounding like Grandad, and the 15-year-olds are falling in love with it as much as I did when I was 15. But,
I mean, I was certainly humming the score for Jackie after I heard it, so,
All right.
Me out.
We went there.
Moving on. Now, right, we're back. We're live. Let's move on.
I want to wait. Can I make one more point,
Okay,
Tim? Just because I'm coming at it from a very different angle. I mean, I do critique the scores when I play them, but it's coming from radio and podcasting, whereas it seems like soundtrack reviewing as per the written word might be dying, or it's just not booming. Mm-hmm. It's interesting to see podcasts and radio shows absolutely explode. And I have soundtrack programs ever since I began. I just wanted to link, to more shows and hopefully to get more exposure to these shows. And it was maybe 6 or 7 when I started. And I am very close to curating at least 100 radio shows and podcasts that deal with soundtracks, and they are incredibly successful. There are some huge shows out there that bring in big numbers. There's 3 that I kicking butt right off the bat, and there are more coming every day, and they are finding their niche and their audience slowly. Massive boom in soundtrack video production and podcast and radio programs, and people are listening mainly because they want to hear someone who is knowledgeable, analyzing a score from, their point of view, or they're a musicologist and they, they can, extrapolate a cue and talk about it that way. But I find that now I am trying to get my little show in there somehow, even though I've been around for 25 years. But there's so many just these new shows that have showed up in the last 12 months that are just exploding and doing not just within the soundtrack community, but like overall. And you think about the Score podcast, the soundtrack show, Soundtracking, they're huge, and they are known all over the world and in the podcast universe.
Well, I mean, maybe that's the answer to the question about why nobody has really managed to develop a written soundtrack site that has had the longevity that we've had, is because soundtrack podcasting is really the go-to method now for people to get their soundtrack news and their soundtrack information and to hear about new scores. Instead of reading about it, they're listening to it. So maybe that's the answer to the question.
Yeah, I think in some ways, certainly attention spans are very, very lax these days. So I think people listening find it, and also I think in fairness, is people just have no time. People's lives are so busy, and it's sometimes it's just kind of literally swiping through feeds and not even paying proper attention. And when it comes to clicking on things, I mean, I think we all know how exhausting it can be just to sometimes self-promote, ourselves, whether it be a radio show, which Eric and I would know a lot, obviously, and Chris as well, about just trying to engage, obviously, an audience, and just trying to, what should I write this time, which will be a good post. It can be exhausting, like it really can. You're thinking, what's a good hook. And as you guys say, the fun is obviously making a playlist and getting the content or setting up the interviews and making it entertaining. But sometimes, you put all the effort in, and it's like, I suppose there's a parallel to working endless hours on a film, which just bombs, and it must be so devastating, whenever they put everything into it and the film just doesn't find an audience, or and basically, the summation there is it can be quite exhausting just getting out there. So if there's sometimes a new reviewer is trying to start something, I suppose the message is stick with it. It is tough, it's hard work, but it's certainly rewarding. And these guys here are the proof in the pudding, as they say. James, can you show off your Dre Goldsmith shirt? Because I don't think anyone can really see it. Does everyone know James?
I can. There we are. Oh, there we are. Can you see that?
Look at that.
Oh yeah, you can
yeah,
see
now
him.
I can.
Yeah,
Okay.
that is. It doesn't come out very often because my wife does not approve, especially in public. But if there's one audience that I thought I could justify it for, it was this one.
I have the same issue. We had a domestic a few days ago there because I was wearing a the Burbs t-shirt. That was the Burbs, and she said, "I am not going out with you wearing that." What's wrong? And she huffed for about 2 days. She did. And look, anyway, let's move on. Whenever we think of that Jerry Goldsmith shirt, and whenever we think of the mid-90s, did anyone else spend £100 on that terrific video that Fred Carlin produced? Like the sessions of Dre Goldsmith with the River Wild, and you had to import it in from America, but you had the option to have a PAL version, not just NTSC. So
I did, yeah, I remember that.
It was well worth it. And then Paul Place and the Music from the Movies guys had a DVD release, didn't they? I think about 10 years later, but. That was a fantastic documentary, and some of those releases in the mid 90s, late 90s were quite seminal. When we think of that era of certainly Lucas, working with Ryko Disc, the brilliant Ben-Hur box set, which I think Marilee Bradford worked on as well. Magnificent Seven, we all heard for the first time in the wonderful Chris Mono recording, remember? And then obviously the FSM recordings, the big blue boxes, and the Star Trek boxes, and it was a Elmer Bernstein box set. Wonderful, wonderful time. And I think we have to give credit to the labels today who are really flying the flag of, La La Land, Trada, Movie Score Media, Veres Saraband are, yeah. I mean, look, I think some of their soundtrack club releases, maybe there seem to be some odd choices, but look, some of them are good. I don't know whether you all agree. You know what I mean? But there's certainly some terrific releases, and it's great to see them really seeing the light of day, and the amount of effort that goes into it. And I think we all share and we all promote their product as much as we can, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
We do, and there was that amazing period in the early 2000s, I guess, when that stuff just exploded, and back then it was mostly stuff that had never been released before, wasn't it? Those suddenly started coming out. If you were a fan of, I don't know, someone like Bruce Broughton, you'd had maybe three albums to listen to for the entirety of his career, and all of a sudden they started coming left, right, and centre, and all those other wonderful golden age things and so on were coming out, and it was a time of plenty, wasn't it, for us? And I have to say, I think there's been one seminal release this year, which was the Bernard Herrmann Phase 4 recordings. It's come out in a wonderful box set
Oh,
which
yes.
sounds incredible and is really nicely packaged. That is, I don't buy many physical albums these days, but I'm glad I got that one. So it's brilliant.
Yeah, totally agree. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that brings us to another topic of coverage, and Christopher and Erica. I'm sure you guys don't broadcast this stuff, but from a writer's standpoint, I ran into a problem during the great bootleg era. Started running into bootlegs in the late '90s that were pressed, and then of course everything started sharing digitally in the 2000s. And I ran into a problem at Filmtracks because I decided, there are a couple of very few bootlegs that came out of isolated DVD tracks, perhaps, that I was going to cover. And I think there are only 2 or 3 of those still on the site. One of which, Glory, which is going to be rendered moot here once the La La Land one gets covered on my site. But one that remains is Randy Newman's Air Force One rejected score, for instance. And I know that was a big challenge, and the labels hated it, of course. I mean, the labels absolutely hated any mentioning of these things. But there was an era there where that was an issue, and now I look at my original want lists of rare film music from my lifetime that I wanted back in 2001, and so much has been released now. I just showed my boys the movie Coming to America with a Nile Rodgers score. There's not much score in there, but there's some really fun stuff in there.
Yes.
And to my knowledge, unreleased.
It is. Mark McKenzie orchestrated that,
Yeah. Yes, he did, but I have very few examples of that left. And that is a tribute to the labels getting these things cranked out.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Yeah, without the labels, I definitely don't have a show. I couldn't afford all of this. There's no way. I would have been done after a few years. But I think it's the same thing with you guys when they all started sending stuff out to us. They knew that what we were doing was important. They wouldn't send this stuff out to just anybody. They knew that we had reach and we had a voice, and they liked what we were doing, and that was going to help sell records for them or CDs or whatever. And I mean, I was very selfish when it came about, but when I contacted Lucas Kendall about the FSM releases, I mean, I thought, I've been doing this for how long, and I've been asking for releases. Nobody's really said no. And I said, well, what can I do in order to, I don't have $20-$40 a month to spend on this stuff. I would, but I mean, it's like, I would love to promote your stuff. Are you interested in getting, and he said, absolutely. I mean, the only caveat was that I finally buy a subscription to Film Score monthly, but that was it. And as long as I was subscribed to his magazine, every single release that he sent me, or every single release that they released was sent to me. And then, so I thought, you know what? Every 3 months I was doing an FSM show. And that was a thank you to them. And I did the same thing with La La Land, do the same thing with Entrada. Even to this day, we just did a Verez Sarabande CD Club show, a 2-parter for their recent releases. And it does help, raise the numbers of my downloads when I get that sort of stuff, because sometimes I get it before anybody hears it. But it's a thank you to the labels and the people behind, the PR agencies. I mean, Beth Krakauer, we all remember her and what a superstar she was. And losing her really hurt, not just the industry, but us as well. There was something personable about her and that relationship. But I don't do this on my own. There's no way I can take all the credit. There was a lot of people that influenced the show and got me to the names. And then it was the record labels who had faith in what I was doing in order to make sure that I was promoting what they wanted. But on top of that, there is no bias. It's like I could say whatever I want about it, and they still will send me stuff. I have yet to receive a correction, except for there was one higher up composer who said my podcast was insignificant, but that's about it. But it's like it's whatever they here you go, played on the air, and that's it. Even if I hated it, I would still play the soundtrack, but I would let people know my opinion. But anyway, to make this a little shorter now, but yeah, the labels and everybody behind the scenes sending us stuff. I couldn't have done this for 25 years without them.
Eric, we're going to have to get together sometime to determine if that was the same composer who called my site idiocy.
Well, in other news, we do have some messages here now. I do want to read these out. Holly McQuillan says, "Squirrel." So I guess she's a fan of Up, is she? Yeah, right. Okay. Is that a tribute to Up?
Wife, if nobody knows.
Yes, should clarify that. Now, I have to say, Christian Kuhn says a big hello. He has no internet,
yeah.
but he does say a big hello to you all, Christian Kuhn. And as a name many of us will know. He wrote lots of reviews for soundtracks, didn't he? I know that name.
Yeah,
Did
he was
write
very
reviews
active on the
for one of your-
Filmtracks board for many years. So yeah, he's one of the originals from back in the 90s who used to post on Christian's board.
Did anyone else, and Christian, I don't mean this to sound at all negative or patronizing, but did you ever get any feedback about your message board being really weird to navigate? Like it's really weird format.
It is, and it's not just the message board, it's the whole site. And interestingly enough, I've had conversations with people in my industry because I'm in the human-centered design web industry and so forth. And so there's a lot of discussion about different types of web design theories. And this goes for whole sites and also message boards and all. And what I've discovered is that it's not just that these things at Filmtracks have been left the way they are out of convenience through the years. It just as film music has its niche audience, there's also a niche audience for sites with black backgrounds, sites with adaptive retro designs, message boards that function like the old BBS boards of the 90s. There is an audience for these things, and so when I go through these generational updates to features of the site and say, hey, would you like this to become more like Facebook? We'd like to, and I get responses from people directly saying, no, we've got those other forums to serve that need in that format. We want to retain this option over here in this format because we also like this as an alternative. And I've sort of become comfortable with that, but it does require me to preface whenever I'm talking to one of my human-centered design colleagues, yeah, it's intentionally retro, and that's a statement. It's intentionally retro. And if I want to be cute about it, I can say, well, film music is a retro style of music generally, and so it's playing off of that. But no, it's just the fact that it's found its audience. That audience is loyal. It likes that look, and so I figure there are plenty of other boards out there that use new PHP standards that to display things. Film Score Monthly, JW Fan. There's a lot of sites with very, very active boards in modern formats. And so Filmtracks is just an alternative. Technologically, now how I moderate it is also a big point of contention. But from a technological standpoint, it's meant as an alternative to the other sites.
Can I just say, Christian, that I think the design of Filmtracks and the scoreboard is pretty iconic, to be honest, at this point in time. If you were to change it radically, it would be weird to me. Yeah. It's just like the brand. It's just the brand, and it would be so weird to see it modernized.
And that's important. And that's we talk about running these sites and how much work it is. It is a lot of work to keep those types of designs and those types of forms working in today's era. I mean, some of that code is written in the 90s, and I've had to try to update it and jerry rig it.
Bro,
so
I don't know how you do it.
Yeah, it's tough, but the number of people that say, "Hey, Christian, just the fact that it looks somewhat like 9 is so important to me." It's just the nostalgia factor and nothing else really, and that's great because I'm a nostalgic fool myself. I still own my 1989 station wagon, so I think that's fantastic. But it serves a purpose. And I get a lot of hate mail. People say, you're a moron. You don't know how to design. What are you doing? This is so backwards. And it's like, I take it or leave it.
Mm-hmm. No, hey, look, it's good to get that total perspective. That's a good answer. Great answer. And the other thing I was going to ask now, and there are a couple of other questions here, but you talked about bootlegs there. There was a big issue whereby, I suppose even worse than bootlegs was the file sharing, which was done on a lot of message boards, which became a complete nightmare for moderation purposes. And then Like I know Lucas Kendall pretty much, hang up his hat, as they say, because it just became, I think, just, well, emotionally draining for him, professionally draining as well. So when it comes to moderation, I mean, that for all of you must have been a nightmare, because I mean, you must have been privy to all this kind of file sharing.
It's tough because of time where we're sort of quasi accessible in the secondary market. And when I say that, I say I'm with Doug Fake when Entrada was in the back of Cinemunda in San Francisco, decades and decades and decades ago. And you look at the 90s and those stores would sell Tsunami product. I mean, the bootlegs would get passed. And so there was an era when the bootleg was pressed, when the bootleg was sort of okay. And then all of it became digital. And you get the Hound Davis, who we know who were just going to go out and destroy anybody that was going to share something. And that the digital changed it. We make money off our sites. It makes money how it changed how all the labels make money. It changed everything. Mm-hmm. And that is the one thing in moderation where if I get a complaint from any rep, from anybody, from any rights holder, like, hey, there is some sharing going on or something, I will everything to help them investigate, to give them server logs, several logs. I'll do that because that is.
Yeah. Well, when you talk about Brian Davis and Perez, I think one of their most recent excellent releases was the Matrix SA CD, hybrid CD. So that Don Davis score in fantastic 5.1 sound. I mean, that was wonderful. I mean, we haven't had an SA CD club release for some years, I think. I mean, the last one I recall was it Trey Goldsmith's Great Train Robbery, perhaps? It was quite a while ago, but that was a joy to hear. So brilliant. Now, there's some questions here, yes. Now, there are some questions on the previous chat. Whenever my computer imploded, sadly, I lost that feed. So, Eric, you may have to interject.
Yeah, I'll get those.
I know Yavar had a couple of good ones, and Yavar, he particularly praised your voice, James. He thinks you should do radio. Collier has asked, we all know that film music is changing and that it will never be the same. What do you all think about orchestral concert music being the continuation of the music style we all like? Eric, we'll start with you.
Also, I'm going to try to get all these questions for you.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Christian?
I'm happy. Well, I was just volunteering myself. I was going to say, I think that,
Okay.
that one big attraction of film music is the dramatic flow it has and the emotional current, and that being in a film forces the composer to do that. And that while I suspect that's what draws a lot of us to it, is the drama, the dramatic flow. It's musical storytelling, and concert music can do that, and an enormous number of times has done that, but it tends not to have that direct narrative connection, I think.
100%. That's what I was going to say. It's great if it's continued through that means, but I want it connected to storytelling. That when I hear the song, hear the music, I associate it with a character or a place or an event or something very specific that I've seen and experienced. Better than nothing if it continues as concert music, but I want to see it continue to be a part of the film or television or video game experience.
Christian?
I've become very fond of going to large symphony performances of films to screen. The Seattle Symphony has done that, and I have mixed feelings about it sometimes because, for instance, you can go to Fellowship and it is a magnificent experience. The Seattle Symphony is wonderful. A lot of it depends on the audience. Stella and I went to see Sorcerer's Stone, first Harry Potter, and it really wasn't a great experience because the audience was encouraged to boo and hiss and yell at the screen, and
Yes.
I'm there to listen to the music.
That isn't good. And I've heard that John Williams' management doesn't approve of that at all.
No.
I'm not sure why that's happening, but anyway.
And so you get into also the a debate about showmanship when it comes to film music concerts. And John Williams puts on fantastic shows. I would have paid a lot of money to go see John Williams conduct the Seattle Symphony a few years ago when Spielberg was there. No ticket ever came up, so it wasn't even an option. But there's some guys that put on great shows. Danny Elfman, obviously, if he's going to get up there and perform Nightmare Before Christmas, he's going to pack the place, and it's going to be a riotous show. Brian Tyler, simply because of who Brian Tyler is and how Brian Tyler looks like, is going to get an audience when he gets up there and conducts. It's great. But I don't know. I worry about who are the showmen they're going to get up and really continue this in concert form.
John?
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything everybody said. One thing I will say is that, talking about the showman thing, someone who's doing a fantastic job these days is David Newman. The fact that I live in Los Angeles allows me to go to the Hollywood Bowl on a fairly regular basis. And David puts on these absolutely fantastic concerts that celebrate both classic film music and often John Williams, because it's usually tied to one of his concerts. But the fact that David has sort of positioned himself to be almost like the unofficial ambassador of film music these days, he's very much championing all these great orchestras. Every concert that he programs, there's Roger in there, there's Elmer Bernstein in there, there's a lot of his father in there, obviously. So I think that somebody like him, especially him, is really doing an outstanding job of selling classic film music to younger audiences. People who come to hear Harry Potter and Star Wars, and then all of a sudden they're hit with, Vertigo, or they're hit with, the main theme to the Magnificent Seven. That kind of ambassadorship is really bringing the classic film music to the younger generation, and I think that needs to be something that's very much celebrated.
No, I'm glad you brought that up. And just, I think this weekend he conducted the opening of the Academy's Museum, didn't he? The Wizard of Oz Live to Picture, which
that's right.
I saw. It looked like a fantastic show. And he's done some concerts in Europe, which I think there was a wonderful concert which is televised over here on Sky Arts. I don't know if you guys get it. I think HBO maybe sometimes there's a crossover with Sky and HBO, so you guys might see David Newman conducting with Anna Sophie Mutter on violin in this wonderful German kind of open air concert. It's terrific. So if you get a chance to watch it, do. And hopefully he'll get maybe to travel more. Especially, thankfully, things are restrictions are relaxing, so we'll get to see him leave America more. But talking of that, the LA Phil, their announcement last week, it was wonderful to see them embracing a series of TV music concerts. Have you guys seen this? The LA Phil have programmed in their new season some TV music live concerts, which is great. So
I didn't know anything about that.
Yeah, it's something you should definitely seek out, because they're they haven't done that much, have they? LA Phil, so it's good to see. Now, yes, some questions. Alan Rogers, who we've mentioned, great guy. We all know him very well. He's saying the taste in music. He thinks that most people who come to everyone's sites want to know the reviewer writer's tastes. Yeah, that's very good. I certainly. Mansell, John's a great guy. He writes with a particular favorite tone to Italian, rather obscure scores, and sometimes Hammer horror scores. He's a fantastic authority on those, and he's a great Morricone fan as well. So if you guys can check out Movie Music International by John Mansell, I would recommend his work as well.
He writes great liner notes too.
Yes, that's true. He does. Nate Underkuffler has said podcasts and YouTube videos really demonstrate the large audience made of aspiring composers or musicians who can appreciate and want to learn about it. Pure film music fans or collectors is a related but different audience. So, not that there isn't crossover between the two, but review sites, he thinks, appeal primarily to the latter group.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair summation. Fair summation. Yeah, do you all agree?
Yeah.
And we have Lord, so I'll just say Edmund.
Edmund Meineritz.
spending so much time in the retro aesthetic of Filmtracks has caused me to pretty much design. So, Christian Clemenson, I resent you for this. A bit of tongue in cheek there. Christian must have been eaten by the lawnmower. He's not there.
Yeah, we lost him. Yeah.
Hopefully he'll be back. Nate as well says only small, isolated, and rather insular communities of online film music fans existed 25 years ago. True, and I'm glad one of you, was it Chris, that mentioned JW Fan, which back in 1999 when it launched, I think it was episode or music from episode 1.
That's right.
And then Ricard Biffan really expanded it with the help of Andreas. And also Jeff's website, johnwilliams.org, is definitely worth mentioning. That was a real go-to site, I think, for many of us to find out John
Yes.
Williams information.
Yeah, it was the first Williams website I ever went to back in college when I first discovered the internet. I was like, John Williams was the first search term. I'm like, what's this internet? And I was like, oh my God. But he was great. Yeah, I used to talk with him all the time. Yeah, Jeff was fantastic.
Yes, yes. And the other one as well was, SoundtrackNet, Dan Goldwasser.
Yes.
Did we lose Tim?
Did we lose
Did
Tim?
we lose Tim?
Oh,
there
Oh
he
no,
is.
he's back.
Oh, we're back. Okay, Vincent
Yep.
Fernandez, what is your review process? So let's start
Oh,
with
good lord.
Go ahead. I'll
Christian needs to be here for this.
He does. I
Yeah.
know. I want to hear that process. But I mean, here's the thing, James. Your process changed, though, right? Or are you still writing the same amount, or is it John? I'm not sure. Someone like condensed their reviews, or super long reviews, or went from smaller reviews to longer reviews. I'm not sure which one.
There was a point I reached when I thought I've written 1,000 of these things. I haven't. It's a struggle to think of new things to say, and so I came to a deliberate decision that actually I would try to say to just write fewer words but say the same thing. There was one composer in particular who I won't say who inspired me to that, because there was a rush of releases of this guy's music in a short space of time, and they were all so similar to each other. I just reached the point where I thought I could just copy and paste the last one, and so I thought actually there is because Christian and John certainly are both very much more verbose than I am and write in much greater detail, and I thought actually there probably is a space for somebody to just, if somebody's only got 5 minutes, that let's churn out a few paragraphs, then but still try to say the same, convey all the information I want to in that space, and so I did that. Of course, sometimes I break my rule and I end up whittling on for ages when I really, really enjoy something. But
How long does it
review
usually take you
process,
to write a review, James?
I mean, again, this is in days gone by. I would say when I had the luxury of time in my life, I could sit and listen to something over and over again and make notes of where all the thematic relationships were. Whereas these days, without that luxury of time, I have to wing it a bit, and so and I know you can tell sometimes when somebody's I have put less effort into it, but it's just that I used to write 200 reviews a year, and now it's probably more like 50 or 60. But even to get 50 or 60 out, I just can't. I listen to something, form an impression. If I can see the film, which actually has become easier these days because so many of them are streaming immediately, I can see them more easily than when I had to try and find a babysitter and whatever. So I'll try and watch the film if I can. Listen to the thing a few times and usually copy someone else's thematic analysis to make sure I get the things in the right place.
Yeah, I remember when I was writing reviews, I think by the time I stopped, my process had become, in terms of the structure of the review, it was I tried to do 1 or 2 paragraphs of context about the film, the video game or whatever the score was for, and then 1 or 2 paragraphs reviewing the music itself as best as I could. And that kind of evolved over all those years where it was just kind of all over the place. And trying to get out of the Christian Clemenson style, which, because that's what I read the most and that kind of informed me the most. So over the years, I tried to consolidate it down into, well, what are the two most important things? Well, you got to have some context, and you've got to have some thoughts about the music itself. So that's kind of what it had boiled down to. But before we move on, I know you guys probably have way more in-depth processes, John. I just wanted to mention, because I don't know if any of you also had other writers. Maybe you do, but I don't recall. But I wanted to shout them out because they're the ones who helped make Track Sounds what it was. I won't get everybody because I can't remember everyone, to be honest. But Richard Buxton, Marius Massalar, Helen San, Edmund Meinertz, Thomas Medina, Matthew. Oh, I forget Matthew's last name at the moment. But there have been quite a good number over the years who I super appreciate lending their talents and their views and voices to Track Sounds that allowed me then to just take the reviews, build the page, and kind of administrate more than try to do all of it. Because it did take, for me, it took about 4 hours per review, the writing the review, because the page, it was front page, remember, no database, no nothing. Everything was static. Everything had to be created from scratch. So it was about a for me, if I wrote the review myself, it's 4 hours from start to finish, which is a lot of time for one review. But having those guys contribute their reviews was awesome, and I just wanted to shout them out.
Yeah, I have the same. I'm sure everybody knows that I work with Craig Lacey, who is a tremendous golden age advocate, and so he's been writing reviews for Movie Music UK for must be going on a decade now, and the amount of information that he's reviews, which really nobody else is touching, is quite remarkable. The scope of his writing is outstanding. But yeah, my review process is pretty similar to Critic. How long it takes me is usually 3 times the album I'm reviewing. So I'll listen to it a couple of times without really paying a whole lot of attention to it, just to kind of get first impressions, and then I try to see the film if I can. But then the actual review process I do in 3 stages. I do a cursory first review while I'm prepping my outline, and so I'll make thematic notes and note which themes come across in different cues and that kind of thing. And then I have a second listen where I'm really listening intently, and I write out all my thoughts and my emotional reactions to things and try and understand the architecture of a score, how themes relate to each other. And then I have a third listen to it while I'm kind of doing a final edit, actually making the grammar of the paragraph flow and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's like a 3-step process. So if it's an hour long CD, it usually takes me 3 to 3.5 hours to write a review from start to finish. That's how I work.
Okay, so Christian, the question was from Vincent Fernandez. What's your reviewing process?
Yeah, sorry, gentlemen. That was unreliable Montana internet in the forest for you, so I had to burp the modem. That's what you get for being out here. My reviewing process, I used to like to just listen to CDs or music in cars or anywhere, but I've gotten to the point where I'm working at home all the time now. I'm a full-time remote worker for my day job, and one great thing about that is that I'm sitting in the same office with my giant surround system, and so I'm constantly listening to the next thing I need to review. And I'm a little bit weird in that I review sequentially. I will not, like if I've got 2 Brian Tylers, I know if I've got Those Who Wish Me Dead and F9, I will listen to them in order in the order they were written, and then not listen to the second one until I cover the first one. I'm kind of weird about that. So I as I was getting caught up this last year, for instance, I really wanted to hear Black Widow. I really wanted to hear Jungle Cruise, but I had to work my way through all this other stuff first, and it didn't even listen to the other ones first. And so for me, my weirdness is listening to everything in chronological order. Now, when I'm actually listening to stuff, I mean, some of these scores that I review that aren't all that great, we talked about earlier, are good to just sort of put on a low level in the background and let them run a couple of times. I will typically run through them a few times before I start taking notes on them. I've discovered, on some of these things these days, it's hard to get thematic attributions unless you're really paying attention. And so there comes that third listen maybe, where it's like, okay, I'm going to sit down and actually write out my thematic attribution notes and actually say, okay, this is where this is emulating Raise the Titanic, or whatever. I'm just going to pull that out of thin air. And but then what's sad sometimes is that those notes can sometimes sit for a month until I actually get around and review. And so it's it's a good process. It's one whereby once the writing actually starts, you can crank out a few thousand words really, really quickly. John and James, maybe you're the same way. I don't know. But once you actually start the writing and you've got your outline, it goes really, really fast. And in my case, if I've got the notes written, I can do 2 pretty full-size 3,000-4,000 word reviews in a single evening, as long as the notes were really prepped and ready to go.
Wow.
So you don't consider your notes part of the review writing?
Well, I've actually thought about, and I have done this a couple of times, publishing my notes, because my notes, I will actually, since I grew up from a musical background, I will actually draw out the first few measures of a theme, and then underneath that in my notes write out where it's appearing and so forth, and what the variations are. And so I've actually thought about publishing that. I thought about actually putting up a paywall and saying, okay, here's the review, but here's actually all the notes that went into making this review, because it has nitty-gritty stuff that actually sometimes didn't even make the review. And the true fans really love that stuff. Even if it's full of spelling errors and so forth.
That's interesting, Christian, that you seem to be the only one of us who actually, correct me if I'm wrong, I know everybody's background, but the only one who actually has a working actual knowledge of music theory. I certainly don't, and I don't think you do, James. Do you think that makes the way you write or way you approach reviewing different? Like, do you hone in on certain musical techniques as opposed to the emotional aspect? I know, speaking personally, I'm almost entirely interested in the emotional connection to the music, not whether it's, whatever musical term you want to enter.
Yeah. No, it's sort of like the God, what was it? It was a Tom Holkenborg score recently where he scored the hero in the minor key and the villain in the major key, and I'm like, okay, sorry, man, that just doesn't work. It's just no. One of the
I wouldn't even notice.
and it didn't work. I'm trying to remember I think it was Godzilla versus Kong. Now that I think about it, but no, I actually consciously have to suppress that, because if you read the score, if you read any of the forums, you'll see that there are people making some very intelligent discussion about the technical musical aspects of this. And I have waded into that sometimes and discovered that it just loses most audience members. They don't want to hear it. That there might be some people who really find that interesting. But a 16th note versus this type or whatever, they don't care. It doesn't mean anything to them. And so, John, to your point, yes, it's more important that you I think cover things in a review that they can understand, which is if a theme evolves, is it evolving by maybe adding a note here or whatever, making it longer because the character it's representing has become more complex. People can get that. But if you start going into all the vagaries of how Jerry Goldsmith would write, his meters and so forth, which are a little unusual and very unique to him, people don't want to hear that. Well, some do, but the masses don't.
Yeah, I think if you do mention that you are giving a reason for finding that with some of the YouTube videos that I'm watching, they're super knowledgeable, but then they'll be like, so Don Davis's thing track went through the diminished scale and went to the A minor on the 7th note. And then it just goes on. I'm like, well, what does that mean?
Okay. Why did he do that?
Why did he? And so if you can tell me why that's interesting or why he changed the scale, or that's where I'm like, oh, cool. Like the musicologist will be like, yes, I'm glad that's in there. But if you can, feed both ends here, right? You got the people who have no idea what you're talking about, and then you have the musicologist. But if you can bring it into context of why that works in the movie and why that might be, I mean, you know what I'm talking about, but that's where it irks me, where it's just like constant music theory, but it doesn't mean anything to the masses, honestly.
Yeah, I do have to geek out. I admit I love the sites. There's some young writers we have who will actually write out on sheet notation, this is what the theme looks like. You know, and the geek in me will go over to the piano and play it, and that's just fantastic. I love that. But the audience is very slim, and our audiences are slim to begin with. So if you're going to take it down to that 10% of our larger audience, then I'm just concerned at that point that, yeah, you're missing the point. But people will get it from the gut reaction, like John, you said. It's just the gut reaction. How does that emotion hit you? How does you and I, John, could get in a great discussion about To Olivia and what Debbie Wiseman did and did not do in there. And you and I might disagree in that, because I didn't feel there was enough evolution in the themes. The themes at the beginning were essentially the same as the themes at the end, and how they were expressed, and they didn't evolve. You know, that's the type of thing. That's the type of discourse that I think our fans appreciate more than the musicology stuff, as you say, Eric.
Well, guys, there's a couple more questions here, and I think then we'll cap it off with 2.5 hours. I think is a very healthy running time. The running time of Empire of the Sun, which is one of my favorite Spielberg films. A little bit sad, I know that. Anyway,
Not random
Anthony,
at all. Not random.
No.
and Anthony Aguilar is echoing Christian Kuhn's question. Because the internet has changed, should film music criticism evolve in any way? Just a kind of quick answer from everyone there.
Depends on what you mean by evolve.
It should.
I mean,
It should. I think in a perfect world, what John and James and I do would merge with what Eric and Chris are doing. In other words, you have the written word, and yet every time you reference something, you have a musical clip or some type of musical commentary to go with it. I mean, in a perfect world, if we were all retired and wealthy trust fund babies, that would be the future perfect multimedia, I think, for our audiences.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, no, that
Wondered why that never happened with you guys, and I think someone tried it. I'm not sure whether it is within our group, but I always thought that was the perfect way to illustrate your point. And I'm just wondering, I guess it could be a rights licensing issue, but still, I mean, I thought that would have been perfect, especially with Greg's reviews, John, because there's so much there. And he's like, well, you know, here's now track 2 from such and such, and here's the theme. I would love to hear it, even though I'm familiar with the soundtrack. I think just hearing it would just add a little bit more. You're right, Christian.
I agree. I think from me, it's just a lack of technical knowledge and capability. I just don't know how to do that. I know how to write. I don't know how to do anything else.
we tried it with audio reviews. Like they would actually read their reviews that they had written. And then put the music they were talking about underneath it. We put that on SoundCloud, but the rights stuff scares me to death. It just scares me I just don't want to deal with that. But we tried it.
BMI and ASCAP came after me because of my audio clips, even though they wanted me to pay, and I didn't think it was necessary. And it was among, in the end, that was one of the 2 reasons I ended up dropping them in 2014, at least doing new ones. But the whole point of the audio clips that I was doing is I would do 4 per score, and I was intentionally trying to match them up to a specific point I was making in my review. And what I decided not to do editorially, and I wish I had not done this at the time, I decided not to actually link them in the review, which is what I should have been doing at the time. In the end, it didn't make a difference because it just took so much time to do them. That's the thing. I mean, Eric, you know, it takes so much time to assemble this stuff. And if you're going to assemble all of it and write out 3,000 words about it, and then try to figure out a way to merge them, then you're just, how many of those are you going to get done a year? 20, 30? Just
Forget
tough.
This is not our day job. You know, we all have our day jobs, and then we do this whenever we can to fit it in around it. You know, and we have lives, and we have wives and children, and you know, the whole thing.
And working with real audio is never fun, right, Christian?
Oh Jesus! No, I kept up with real audio, man. That talk about stubborn persistence, man. I was encoding everything in MP3s, but then I was transferring back to real audio. I don't understand why there were people in 2014 still listening to real audio clips, but they were.
still using it. Yeah,
So
I was a dinosaur.
I think the other big takeaway from this is the fact that every time Christian does something, somebody.
That's why we all lag behind. It's like, let's see what happens to Christian. Oh, he's good. All right, let's
If he
stop.
gets sued, that's fine. We won't.
well, but in a way, I mean, think about the audio clips. I've sometimes thought about, do I just get rid of all of them? I mean, there's thousands and thousands of film tracks, but then I start thinking about all the obscure stuff where it isn't necessarily on YouTube. Most of the stuff's on YouTube, yeah, and that's why it's another reason I stopped doing it. But there are some obscure scores from the 90s that I did where nobody has this stuff out there, or it still is illustrating a point that I want to make, and so I've decided, why not just go ahead and leave it. But audio is tough. You know, I have tremendous admiration, Eric and Chris, for podcasts and shows, because you're taking the narrative and turning it into the multimedia, you know, of what we're covering here. That's tough. It takes a hell of what James and I are trying to do when we're jotting down notes. It's no easier. I'm sure.
No, and you're right. And the way that I attack my shows is, and I think I mentioned this earlier, where, you know, you guys are spending time just on one score for, you know, 4 or 5 hours, and then you release that. And back in the day, I was attacking 9. So, and that's 9 reviews, putting everything in context over the course of 7 days. I mean, to this day, I mean, I write way too much, and I just feel like, you know, I really got to cut down, and it's a hard thing to do because I want people to, again, its context is so key, but it takes me 2-3 days to write something, but then you're recording, then you're editing, then you're encoding, now you're updating your website, you're making sure that it is an crazy process. And I mean, thank God I have help now. My team is incredible, and they've really saved my butt. But yeah, it's it was insane, and that's why, I mean, even my production has gone down myself because I just couldn't handle it. I burnt out a couple of years ago. I had to take an 8-month hiatus and say, this isn't fun anymore, and that's the problem. And I don't want to be doing this because I'm competing with somebody or because it's just becoming work. And so it did take me about 8 months to fully realize, okay, I got to do this because I love it. And I want to really get it out there to the people that are really interested in the show. And so that's why I still do take the time, because I think I owe it to the listeners to, you know, to experience what they've experienced before. And and that's a hard thing to keep up. But yeah, you're right. Podcasting is an insane amount of work, but I'm doing something different compared to what other podcasters do. Like Christopher was doing it's a chat show. You're still prepping it. You're still prepping questions, but the content is more organic. Whereas like every single word that I say on my show is written. I can't, it's tough for me to do ad lib shows. I'm never good at it. And it's just because I don't absorb as much information as other people do. But it's like, and doing like 9 scores and trying to do research on 9 scores within 7 days is insane.
Yeah, that's hard.
So
That's a lot.
but it is, it's finding that balance and evolving. That's the other thing, is trying to evolve and maybe make it a little bit easier, but still have that quality. It's such a tough thing to handle.
I think another future for us, when I think about what's next for us, questions from the fans, you go on YouTube and you can find reviews of anything, all sorts of internet personalities reviewing any type of product. And I've often thought, you know, is the future me taking the CD, holding it next to my head, and doing a 60 to 90 second YouTube video with even more commentary than I put in my reviews, but boiling it down to something that's entertainment value, maybe playing a little bit of the music in the background or something. Is that our future? Is that the attention span? Because as John and James were talking, well, I hope not. Well, as you know, reading is a huge part of our family's life. Stella's an avid reader and supports books, and that's important to us. But those folks out there are not. And reading is dying, and I worry about that. I worry about, is our future that 90-second YouTube clip where maybe we're close, maybe we're not. I don't know, but it's that attention span. It's just what's going to get the attention, what's going to bring in people to our genre of music, get them interested in it. Are we going to have to become like that? I hope not.
I think that could be a gateway. a gateway into the larger world and the more in-depth world that we're used to.
Yeah.
I
Nate
don't
just
think there's
actu-
any possible way that I could summarize my thoughts on a score in 90 seconds. I mean, my brain just does not work that way. I mean, I would hate that because I would feel like I would lose a lot of context,
Yeah.
historical perspective. I think the other aspect of what we all do that hasn't really been looked at is that we are, in effect, chronicling a period in film music history by writing about it and having that historical perspective. If you're boiling that down to holding up a CD and having a 90-second soundbite, it's losing that because it's the depth of knowledge that we all have and our peers all have between us.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm
Well,
just old-fashioned.
No, it's the gateway question. It is,
Mm.
we're going to have people that will read 5,000 word reviews or listen to the podcasts for hours on end. We will have those folks, but how do we replenish the stock of those folks? How do we get today's 16-year-olds to be, now the people that are avid followers of what we're doing? How do we bring them in? That does concern me.
But I mean, looking at the people who post on your board, Christian, I mean, we don't necessarily seem to be losing that. I mean, there are a ton of people who post a lot now, who are in their late teens, who I don't think there's necessarily a lack of interest, but I agree it's just how you approach them and how you bring them in. And I don't know what the answer to that is.
Yeah, I worry the numbers are declining. I mean, that's just what I see in 10-year blocks. And if you look at 10-year blocks, it's just the numbers are slowing down. And I don't know if that's because we don't have flat eaters. I mean, there's that discussion to be had. But, we don't have blockbusters like that would sell a certain number of units. But I do look at the viewership that we get. And yes, there will always be the younger guys coming in. But it just seems like they're getting fewer and fewer in aggregate, and I do worry about that because that means that my site's not doing its job as a gateway site. And how do I need to look at what I'm doing to get more attention for younger folks?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's two more questions here, which are very good. So we'll round off with these two. First of all, Lars Peterson is asking, what was the very first LP or CD of a film soundtrack you purchased? So let's reminisce back. Eric, to you first of all. What was it?
The first soundtrack I purchased with my own money was the cassette to Jurassic Park. And I don't know why I decided to get this cassette, because there was a CD and I had a CD player, but there was just, don't ask. But I mean, my parents, yeah, but my first soundtrack, my first soundtrack CD was actually Schindler's List, and that was a Christmas present given to me by my parents. But the rest of my soundtrack collection at the time was all ripped from borrowing albums from the library. So, but yeah, that was the start of my journey, 1993, 94, when I got my first soundtrack album myself.
Okay, great. Chris?
I'm trying to remember the first purchase. That's tough. I think it was the Star Wars album. I think back in '77. But I know the first one I had was my dad's Ben-Hur. I think it was a 2 LP release. I think it was '78 as well. I have it still somewhere. I think I just stole it from him. But I think the Star Wars LP was my first purchase. I was just a kid, so I must have borrowed the money from my parents. But yeah, that's what comes to mind.
Okay, cool. James?
I think the first one I bought was a cassette of Star Trek V. I was a Star Trek fan first and a film music fan second, and I think all of my early purchases were probably Star Trek albums, and Star Trek V was the first.
I remember being so disappointed that row your boat wasn't. Thank goodness. Good grief. Anyway, but what an opening title. A lovely, lovely opening title.
Yeah.
Brilliant, brilliant. John Broxton.
All James Horner. So the very first one I bought was Legends of the Fall, spring of 1995. There were 3 films that I saw in sequence during that year: Legends of the Fall, Braveheart, and Apollo 13. And I was very young at that time, and I bought Legend. I went to see Legend, immediately inspired to go out and buy the soundtrack. That was the first time that had ever happened to me. I didn't like the film very much, but the score just blew me away. bookstore right in the same mall where the theater was. So I went and bought Legends of the Fall, and then a couple of months later I saw Braveheart, and then literally the very next week I saw Apollo 13, and I was like, wait, James Horner. That's an interesting development. So it was Legends of the Fall, and then also that summer I bought a compilation, one of those silver screen compilations called Cinema Century, which had all, like 3 minutes from The Godfather, 3 minutes from The Magnificent Seven, 3 minutes from all these classic scores that had all been done by Nick Rain and the City of Prague Philharmonic. So it was really those two, Legends of the Fall for the specific score, and then Cinema Century, and that's what opened it all up for me.
Okay, brilliant. Christian?
So this question is really challenging because my father had an absolutely massive soundtrack collection of LPs, and then he never did cassettes, but went on to CDs, and then he'd always give them to me. And so I'm trying to remember. I remember the first CD he gave to me was Beetlejuice, because he listened to it and decided, yeah, it's kind of fun. Didn't want to listen to it ever again. He was into more Golden Age romantic type stuff. Danny Elfman rocked his world. I think I have to think about ones he refused to buy and I wanted, and I hate to say this, but I believe the first LP I bought because he refused to buy it was Transformers the movie in 1986.
Nice.
So I'm dating myself there.
Nice.
Vince DiCola reference there. That's
Vince DiCola reference, yes.
That's
I darn well had to have that Unicron music at the beginning. I think it's another one of those that's on my backlist of things I need to review for Filmtracks. No, I think the very first CD that I bought was probably Willow, which, because if you remember right, Willow was a short printed commercial run originally and became really hard to find for a number of years.
Virgin.
Yeah, on Virgin. And that was I think it was, I can't remember if it was only printed in Europe. It might have been. But that was one of those where my father got me set up with Doug and Trotta, and that might have been my first order. It was with, late 80s, early 90s back in the day.
Yes, brilliant. Well, mine, yes, similar to you, and I got so many recordings from my father, like Ron Goodwin, Jeff Love, John Barry, the Charles Gerhardt collection. Definitely, I inherited from him. But the first, it was a cassette, similar to some of you. The cassette I bought was The Last Crusade, Indiana Jones, and it was on repeat. I just adored it, and what a score. And it even, if you open the booklet of the cassette, it actually had J.W. He actually kind of signed it. Not.
I remember that.
But it was. Do you remember that? Yeah, it was a nice touch because the CD didn't have that for some reason. But it was yes, terrific memories. So our final question is a really good one. Save the best for last. This is from Edmund, and thanks Edmund for this question. Since you have all been covering film music for quite some time, what composer did you write off initially, but has since come around and won you over? Interesting question, I thought. Eric.
This is easy. It happened recently. It's Austin Wintory. And I didn't get his music at all. I don't know why. It just didn't click. But then I was a guest on a friend of mine, his show called Visions and Sound here in town in Kitchener. His name is Rob Daniels, and he's a very good friend with Austin. Austin actually wrote his theme music for his show. And so it just so happened that I was there for a show when he was presenting music from Assassin's Creed Syndicate. And I don't think I had heard it at the time. And Austin decided that he was going to join in on the program. And I started listening to Austin talk about his music and how he composed it and what he was thinking about. And that just fascinated me. And all of a sudden, Rob would play the piece and I'm like, wait, that clicks. I get it. This is great. So after a few tracks, I took over Rob's show. I started doing an interview with Austin, asking him a million questions about, well, how did you do this? How did you do that? What about this? Da, da, da. And all of a sudden, it just became apparent that this guy is just on a whole other level. And that's when I fell in love with Austin Wintory's music. And since then, I have been a huge fan. And so much so, so great. I did one of these streams last weekend for my 25th anniversary. And, I had a lot of close friends and listeners on the program, but Austin Wintory jumped in on the program. And I even told him
Oh,
that
cool.
story, and he remembers the story. And we had a really good laugh about it. But I've come to respect that man like no other modern composer now, just especially what he's doing on YouTube and how he's teaching composers how to write, but he's also giving you the insight in how he writes a score. He's talking to people who don't know much about film music and informing them. What he's doing, he is one of the best ambassadors of film, TV, and video games music out there. But also his music is, he's attacking it in a traditional way, but he's also doing experimental stuff and jamming it all together. I love everything about Austin Wintory, but I wouldn't have said that maybe 5 years ago because I didn't like anything that he wrote.
Chris?
I've been desperately trying to think of someone, and some come to mind, and I'll probably lose my film music fan card for admitting this, but it has nothing to do with them. It has everything to do with me and my own level of maturity with film music. I was not a fan of Jerry Goldsmith, James Newton Howard, or Elliot Goldenthal for quite some time. If it wasn't James Horner or John Williams, I was kind of like, I don't get it. I don't hear it. I don't see what's the big fuss over. And obviously over time, the more exposure I got to more of their music, the more I started to see what the big deal was. And my musical taste just matured, and it wasn't just the big bombastic, adventurous thing that my palate craved. And so all three of them, I think Elliot Goldenthal probably took the longest. I wasn't really a big fan of his until I think Final Fantasy. Somehow that one clicked for me, and it just opened up everything that he had done prior to. I'm like, oh my gosh, he's been good for a long time. I was just stupid. So yeah, it's not had nothing to do with, obviously has nothing to do with their talent. It has everything to do with my own immature musical. Well, I wouldn't want to call James Horner and John Williams immature, but I was very narrow in my palette for what I would call good music. But obviously, since then, I've come to love those three just as much as Horner and Williams.
Okay, James.
It was John Powell for me. I think he is one of the finest film composers there is, though. When he first sort of became a solo name, I just thought it's another Zimmer clone coming from that factory model of writing film music, and I just dismissed it. And I remember, his first score was Face Off, his first big one that people noticed, wasn't it? And that probably didn't, that wasn't a piece of evidence you would use that pointed towards him becoming as great as he has. But even when the evidence was mounting and he was doing all this great stuff, I just had this preconceived notion of him being just another clone of this sort of processed sound. And then it was probably the Bourne Identity when I thought, well, hang on, he's doing that. He's actually doing something a bit special. And then that became such an influential score, and he has obviously matured and gone in a different direction in the sort of stuff he works on these days. But he's obviously one of the preeminent composers at the moment.
100%. Yeah, totally agree. John?
Yeah, I think the story is very similar to Chris's in that I think it was my lack of sophisticated musical knowledge which stopped me from appreciating certain composers. So I mean, the ones that spring to mind very much are Elliot Goldenthal, but also looking back, people like Alex North and Leonard Rosenman and Jerry Fielding, even Lalo Schifrin, some of the stuff that he was doing in the 70s. I just don't have the musical vocabulary to understand what it is that they're doing, and in a way I still don't. So they were always very difficult for me to get into. But the one that really sticks out for me is Howard Shore. Prior to Lord of the Rings, it all sounded just like flat darkness, if you know what I mean. I don't really have any better way of explaining that. In fact, I actually interviewed Howard many years ago, before he did Lord of the Rings, when I was just starting out. And one of my absolutely ridiculous questions was something along the lines of, Howard, how come all your music sounds so terrible on CD? And it didn't really go down very well. But
Figures.
he was very nice about it and tried to give a very sophisticated and intelligent answer. But that was possibly my low point in terms of interacting with the composer. But after Lord of the Rings came out, and it was very clear that he did have this great sense of music and drama and narrative, that really switched my mentality in terms of what he was doing. And so I could then go back, and now things like The Fly and M Butterfly and Dead Ringers and all those wonderfully dark romantic scores, I just had no appreciation for that until Lord of the Rings. And then Lord of the Rings sort of like switched a light bulb on in my head, and then now I can go back and say, oh yeah, all the stuff that he's doing in Lord of the Rings all has its genesis in all these great early scores that he was doing for Cronenberg and people like that. So for me, I would say it's Howard Shore.
Okay, great answer. Christian?
I think, John, you raise an important point, because for me, I still struggle with avant-garde music. I mean, I really do struggle. I still don't get Elliot Goldenthal. I mean, I'll admit that. I'll raise my hand and admit to that. I'm sorry. But I think the opposite has happened as well, which is that you ask the question, well, Edmund asked the question, who have you come around on a composer? I found a lot of composers I used to love who I don't appreciate their music anymore. And I used to be the world's foremost Rachel Portman fan and John Barry fan, and the whole sugary saccharine romance element. I don't know if I'm getting old and cynical and becoming an asshole. I don't know if it's because I don't know what it is. But
you are. That's the answer.
It very well could be. Is Rachel Portman going to win any more of my awards? Maybe not. But it's tough. But when you look at the opposite, this is Edmund Meinertz, the ever popular with the ladies, Edmund Meinertz, who asked this question. He'll be very pleased to know that my my answer is also John Powell, to a lesser extent James Newton Howard. And I think with John Powell, it's not just the fact that he started off writing a lot of 3-star functional music and has managed to evolve into really spectacular composer, but he's managed to do it in the era of the RCP influenced groupthink method. And we talk a lot about why film music isn't what it is now. And a lot of it, I do believe, and this is one of Filmtracks' political purposes, is to question the groupthink method of composing film scores, but to actually maintain a lot of that functionality in the production end, but also still yield really good music, really functional film scores. That in the last few years, Call the Wild was the best of last year. A lot of my colleagues thought it was good, but not best. And so I for some reason, his method and what he's coming up with is clicking. And the same to an extent with James Newton Howard. I mean, I will. We had a thread at Filmtracks recently about, does Howard fantasy work anymore for some people? And I'll poke at my friend Christian Kuhn for that. But yes, in my opinion, it does, because who else is writing that? Who else is writing Jungle Cruise? Who's going to write Jungle Cruise right now? Regardless of what you think about the score or the Metallica influence or any of that, who's writing that? And so I'm stoked about Fantastic Beasts 3. I look at Fantastic Beasts and I underrated that score. And I go back at it now and I listen to the complexities of the thing and go, damn, nobody's writing like this these days. And so I very much appreciate that. And if I were to go back to that year and reevaluate my awards, it would work its way further up. And I'm not afraid to admit that I need to go back and reevaluate awards in the past, because our change would create things. And so for me, the answer is Powell and Howard.
Let's throw another name out as well. Someone this has happened to me very recently, but Lorne Balfe. For many years, I did not like any. But something happened sort of towards the beginning of end of 2019, beginning of 2020, and it was almost like the shackles came off. It was like suddenly he was writing the music he had always wanted to write but was never really allowed to, and then suddenly he came out with his Dark Materials, and this year he's come out with Black Widow and The Tomorrow War, which are just tremendously creative, interesting, fun. He's doing cool things with his orchestra that he never really did before, and so for me, he's someone who's making that change for me right now. I'm actually looking forward to things that Lauren is writing or will be writing, whereas before I was like, oh God, it's Lauren.
Yeah. John,
Black Widow was terrific. I really enjoyed Black Widow and his Dark
Yes.
Materials, and I think he's really impressing consistently these days. I revisited Mission Impossible that he did, which I really didn't like at the time, and listening to it back now, I don't understand why I didn't like it. It's not as intricate and detailed as some of the other scores in the series, but I think it suffers from having a 60-hour album, but there's great stuff in it. I think he's good, and I underrated him, and I echo John's comments.
Well,
I
back
think
in
there's an important point. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Christian. No, go ahead.
One really quick point. I think it's important for us as those of us that run shows and reviews, write reviews. It's important to recognize that we have to keep open minds. And John, I felt exactly the same way about Lauren Bell for many years. And then I heard Home, which I think is one of the greatest children's scores of the last 10 years. And that's one of the I need to review. I never got around to reviewing it at the time. But it's, we go into listening to so many things and we get these preconceived notions. And for me, Elephant was one, the documentary last year was one of those where you have a preconceived notion of what the composer can and cannot do, what they're capable of, and then they blow you away. Every time I go into every score, it doesn't matter even Hans Zimmer. I go into every score hoping this is going to blow the doors off and be 5 stars. It's never personal against a composer to say, no, this is going to be crap, and I want it to be crap. No, I think we're all rooting for even if we don't get a composer, don't like it, we want that to happen for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we totally 100%. We all agree. Well, we have approached the Dances with Wolves length. So what we'll do is we'll cap off, and I just want to say, obviously, thank you to you for watching. Thank you to our participants for sending in their questions and comments. Vikram, thank you for your comment about Eric and Christian sounding alike. I don't see it myself, but
I hear it. I
You
hear
hear
it.
it?
I've looked at Eric a few times. I'm like, I don't see his mouth on me. Oh, it's Christian.
I do want to mention, we talked about Film School Monthly earlier being quite a pivotal magazine and then website for all of us, and I think it's key. I know it's behind a paywall, but FSM Online, fsmonlinemag.com is out there. I would urge you to subscribe if you don't. It's only $4.99 a month, and there is some great content in it. We talked about audio clips being embedded in the articles, and there's a lot of that. And certainly recently we've managed to unearth some of Elmer Bernstein's iconic interviews with the greats from the 1970s. We had an interview with Hugo Friedhofer recently, and we've got some Henry Mancini coming soon, John Addison. So these are things which are in print, yes, but it's great to hear the audio versions of these. So, and I think it's important as well to let's mention Jeff Bond, Doug Adams, Tim Corrin, Jim Lochner, Tim Grieving, and also Charlie Brigden, and some of these guys, some great film music writers out there, Rudy Koppel, and of course I suppose Randall Larson, and the grandfather of them all. Obviously he's not online exclusively, he's also in print, and he's a great writer, is John Burlingame. So there's some wonderful critiques and writers we should certainly name check, and if I've forgotten you, please forgive me for forgetting you, I'm sorry. And as Aaron as well, Aaron Corrin.
You guys remember Andreas Lindahl?
Yes,
Score reviews. Yeah,
that's right. Yes, So, yes, thanks once again to all of you. And here's to another 25 years. Eric Woods at cinematicsound.net, Christopher Coleman at TrackSounds.com, James Southall, MovieWave.com, and yeah, John Broxton, MovieMusic.uk.us. No, MovieMusicUK.us.
Just Movie Music UK.
Wait,
That's
wait,
fine.
we're just going to keep going until he gets it right.
And Filmtracks.com, Christian Clemenson. And it's been great to actually finally put a face to the name, Christian. As you were saying, you have an online profile, so it's really been good, to meet you in this way. The rest of you I know well and we've socialized. It's great to know on a personal level, and it's thank you for asking me to host this. It's been great fun, and thanks. Keep up the great work.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Tim. Really,
Yeah,
I couldn't have
thanks,
done this
Tim.
show without you. We would have been
Wonderful.
lost. So yeah, you've been
Oh,
fantastic.
That's very kind. Well, look, may film music keep us enriched, because as a friend of mine once said, it often all comes back to film music. And so enjoy the music for the movies. And again, thanks for all your work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye,
Thanks for
everyone.
watching, everyone.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
for watching. Yeah, this has been great.
Thank you.
Okay. If you guys will just